Hey there, tonight we're exploring why you wouldn't last a day in a medieval plague town, where the truth is, survival wasn't just about dodging the disease, but navigating a world where even a simple handshake could spell your doom. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. You crack open your crusty eyes to the sound of chaos outside your window. Welcome to a medieval plague town, where waking up might mean you're already late for your own funeral. It's 14th century Europe, and you're smack dab in the middle of Florence or maybe London. Take your pick. They're both doing a stellar job of hosting the Black Death, a not-so-elite club nobody asked to join. The bubonic plague isn't just knocking on the door, it's swinging from the rafters. Let's talk numbers. Between 1347 and 1351, this little pandemic managed to wipe out about 30% to 60% of Europe's population. Think about that for a second. That's like if your morning commute was suddenly a breeze because half the city just vanished. How did we get here? Well, blame it on the fleas and the rats. Or maybe the Genoese ships that brought the disease from the Crimean port of Caffa to Sicily in 1347. These were the original carriers, not exactly the welcome package you'd hope for. Once the plague hitched a ride to Europe, it spread faster than gossip in a medieval tavern. Now, why were places like Florence and London such hotbeds for this microscopic menace? Density, my friend, density. Florence was bustling with around 100,000 people, and London wasn't far behind with about 80,000. These towns were packed tighter than a jar of pickled herring, with sanitation levels that would make a modern sewer system look like a day spa. Spoiler alert, indoor plumbing was not a thing. You'd probably find more waste in the streets than you ever wanted to see, and let's say the air was less fresh breeze and more scent of regret. The medieval understanding of disease was, let's be generous, rudimentary. Theories ranged from bad air to divine wrath. Germ theory, forget about it. The closest thing to a medical explanation was blaming the alignment of the planets. That's right. Some folks believed the stars were snickering down at them while they coughed up a lung. Quarantine was a word that would eventually enter the vernacular, but in the early days, it was more of a let's just hope it goes away situation. The first recorded quarantine was in 1377 in the port city of Ragusa, now Dubrovnik, Croatia, where ships had to sit offshore for 30 days. Spoiler, it didn't really work, but hey, they tried. So, as you navigate this bustling medieval town, dodging carts and trying not to step in anything unsavory, take a moment to appreciate the chaos. It's a swirling mix of desperation, superstition, and the occasional glimmer of hope. The people here are resilient, if a bit misguided by today's standards. They pray, they burn incense, and they point fingers at scapegoats like the Jews and witches, because when you're desperate, any explanation feels better than none. And now, as you consider breakfast, remember that food might be scarce. Prices have skyrocketed. Wheat, the staple of your diet, has jumped in cost due to disrupted trade routes and lack of labor. The economy is as sick as the people, and inflation's a beast that even the most skilled barterer can't tame. So, what's the takeaway from your morning in a medieval plague town? Well, for starters, you're probably not cut out for this life. But more importantly, it's a testament to human resilience in the face of catastrophe. People adapt, even if it's by trial and mostly error. They innovate, they survive, and eventually they thrive. And with that, you take a hesitant step into the street, ready, or not, to face whatever the rest of the day throws your way. Just remember to keep your distance, hold your breath, and maybe invest in a very, very long stick. You step tentatively into the market square, where the usual cacophony of haggling voices and bustling bodies has been replaced by an eerie silence that clings to the air like the smell of stale ale in a tavern. If medieval markets were the heartbeat of a town, then this one's in dire need of a defibrillator. Half of the usual vendors are conspicuously absent, and those who remain look like they've seen better days, probably before the plague decided to gate-crash their lives like an unwelcome in-law. Let's talk economics, shall we? With about a third of the population gone, labor shortages are hitting harder than a blacksmith's hammer. Skilled workers, like your local weaver or blacksmith, are now as rare as hen's teeth. And when everybody's too busy dying to work, who's left to make your favorite wool tunic or that perfectly forged sword? The result? Inflation that makes today's price hikes look like a gentle nudge. Picture this. The cost of wheat, the medieval equivalent of your daily bread, sometimes tripled. And if you think that's bad, everything from salted fish to ale, which, let's face it, was basically medieval Gatorade, saw its price tag balloon like the waistline of a king after a particularly good feast. Now, while most folks were tightening their belts, some savvy, or just plain lucky, people were cashing in on the chaos. Landlords, for instance, were suddenly the belles of the economic ball. With so much land left vacant by its dearly departed owners, the surviving peasants found themselves with more options than a cat at a fish market. Competition for tenants led some landlords to offer better terms, a medieval version of a Black Friday sale. Historians estimate that in some areas, rents fell by up to 30%. The scales of power were tipping, and for once, it wasn't in favor of the nobility. Speaking of power dynamics, let's not forget the guilds. These were the medieval answer to today's trade unions, except with more pomp and fewer acronyms. Guilds maintained standards, trained apprentices, and regulated local industries. But with so many guild members now 6 feet under, the surviving craftsmen could demand higher wages and better conditions. It's like the workers' revolution nobody saw coming, happening under the nose of a plague that couldn't care less. But before you get too carried away, imagining peasants throwing off the shackles of oppression and dancing into a new era of prosperity, let's ground this in reality. Sure, some peasants found themselves with more bargaining power, but many others were left destitute. Fields went untilled, harvests failed, and the ghost towns of once thriving villages became a common sight. And if you were a woman, well, congratulations, you got to keep society running while men dropped like flies, only to be rewarded with even more labor and a fraction of the recognition. Meanwhile, the nobility, those medieval Kardashians, weren't exactly resting on their laurels. They had to adapt or face the financial abyss. Some dealt with the labor shortage by shifting to sheep farming, a less labor-intensive venture that conveniently didn't require a workforce that threatened to unionize. Wool became big business, and England in particular found itself wrapped in the stuff like a cozy, if slightly itchy, blanket. The plague had a knack for shaking up the social order, but it wasn't all roses and revolutionary spirit. For every peasant who managed to snag a better deal, there were countless others who slipped through the cracks. The population decline meant fewer mouths to feed, sure, but it also meant fewer hands to work the land and fewer craftsmen to fill the guilds. In some places, entire towns were abandoned, leaving behind nothing but empty homes and the faint echo of lives once lived. As you navigate the market, you can almost feel the tension in the air, a potent mix of fear and opportunity. The plague has reshaped the economy, yes, but it's also left a society teetering on the edge of change. The old ways are dying, just like so many of the people who upheld them, and in their place, something new is struggling to be born. But whether it will be better, worse, or just different, well, that's a question for the ages, isn't it? And so, with a final glance at the market square, you move on, feeling the weight of history pressing down on you like the stares of those who once filled these streets. The day presses on, and with it, the promise of more revelations, challenges, and maybe even a hint of hope. But for now, it's time to keep moving, because in a medieval plague town, standing still is a luxury few can afford. As you saunter away from the ghostly market square, the midday sun hangs heavy in the sky, reminding you it's time for lunch. Not that anyone here is craving a feast. Welcome to the medieval plague town's version of a lunch break, where the menu consists mostly of thin gruel and a side of existential dread. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's far more on the plate than food, or lack thereof. Now, if you were a medieval townsperson, the church would be your go-to place for solace, guidance, and perhaps a hefty dose of judgment. Except, during the plague, the church was scrambling like a headless chicken, trying to explain why divine protection seemed to have taken a holiday. Clergy, faced with a crisis of faith that would make any theologian's head spin, resorted to drastic measures. The most extreme of these was the rise of the flagellant movements. Picture this. Groups of people parading through the streets, whipping themselves bloody in a misguided attempt to atone for humanity's sins. It's like a medieval version of a viral challenge, except with more blood and fewer hashtags. Flagellants believed that self-inflicted pain could persuade God to lift the plague. I mean, what's a little self-flagellation compared to divine wrath, right? This movement spread like wildfire across Europe, from Germany to Italy, with groups sometimes numbering in the thousands. They'd march from town to town, chanting hymns and lashing their backs, convinced they were saving souls, or at least their own. But here's the kicker. The church wasn't thrilled about this DIY redemption tour. In 1349, Pope Clement VI condemned the flagellants, recognizing that their antics were more likely to spread panic than piety. Plus, they were drawing crowds away from the traditional church services, and nothing irks an institution more than losing its audience. As if that wasn't enough drama for one lunchtime, the plague also brought out the ugly side of human nature, scapegoating. In times of crisis, people crave simple explanations, and unfortunately, that often means pointing fingers. Jews, in particular, became the target of baseless and vicious rumors. Accusations flew that they were poisoning wells or conspiring with dark forces to spread the disease. These were the medieval equivalents of conspiracy theories, lacking any foundation but fueled by fear and ignorance. The result? Pogroms and expulsions became alarmingly common, with Jewish communities in places like Strasbourg and Mainz facing horrific violence. It's a grim reminder that, much like today, when faced with the unknown, societies can turn on their own, inventing villains to avoid confronting the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, bad things just happen. The psychological toll of the plague on survivors was profound, and you could practically see it etched into the weary faces of those left behind. Imagine living in a world where every cough could mean the end, where entire families vanished overnight, and where even the air seemed complicit in your doom. This collective trauma seeped into the art and culture of the time, most famously through the macabre imagery of the Dance of Death, or Dance Macabre. This wasn't your usual courtly dance. It was a grim, skeletal conga line, reminding everyone that death comes for us all, rich or poor, sinner or saint. The Dance of Death became a popular motif in art and literature, with frescoes and manuscripts depicting skeletons leading the living in a final, morbid jig. It was both a reflection of society's obsession with mortality and a coping mechanism, a way to make sense of the senseless. By personifying death, people could attempt to tame it, to face it with a resigned shrug rather than a scream. This imagery resonated deeply, influencing artists like Hans Holbein in the 16th century and even creeping into modern depictions of mortality. It's like the ultimate memento mori, a bleak but oddly comforting reminder that in the end, we're all in this together. As you navigate this medieval nightmare, it's impossible not to feel the weight of these upheavals pressing down on you. The church's struggle to maintain its grip, the scapegoating and violence, the psychological scars. These are all part of the complex tapestry of life in a plague town. It was a world in flux, where old certainties crumbled and new realities emerged, often more terrifying than the ones they replaced. And yet, amid the chaos, people found ways to endure, to adapt, and occasionally to find humor in the absurdity of it all. So, as you take a moment to reflect on the lunchtime chaos of a medieval plague town, remember that history isn't just about the big events or the famous figures. It's about the ordinary people, caught in extraordinary circumstances, trying to make sense of a world gone mad. And as you continue your journey through this peculiar slice of history, Keep an eye out for those glimmers of resilience and humanity that shine through even the darkest of times. After all, as history has shown us time and again, the human spirit is nothing if not stubbornly persistent. As you meander through this medieval maze of misery, the afternoon light casts long shadows, just like the political turmoil unfolding across Europe. The plague wasn't just a health crisis. It was a seismic shockwave that rattled the very foundations of power. Monarchs and leaders were suddenly playing a high-stakes game of chess, except half the pieces had mysteriously vanished, and the ones left were coughing up a storm. Let's start with the top dogs, the monarchs. They weren't exactly lounging on velvet cushions, sipping mead. Take Edward III of England, for example. He had grand ambitions, like winning the 100 Years' War against France. But when the Black Death hit, his army started dropping faster than his approval ratings. Between 1348 and 1350, England lost an estimated half of its clergy and more than a third of its population. Suddenly, finding soldiers was like looking for a needle in a haystack, except the haystack was on fire. The war chest was running on fumes, too. The economy, already strained by the cost of warfare, couldn't handle the double whammy of plague and conflict. Even kings needed to pay their bills, and Edward was no exception. He had to pause his epic quest for French land, focusing instead on keeping his own kingdom from unraveling at the seams. Thus, the plague inadvertently hit the pause button on one of medieval history's longest-running feuds, giving the French a much-needed breather. Now, if you think that was chaotic, wait until you hear about the feudal system. Imagine a massive Jenga tower, teetering on the brink. The plague yanked out a few too many blocks, leaving nobles scrambling to maintain their grip on power. The system depended on a delicate balance of obligations and loyalties. Lords needed vassals to work the land and fight their battles, while vassals needed protection and sustenance. But with so many peasants pushing up daisies, the labor force was as scarce as a dragon's tooth. This scarcity shifted power dynamics in ways that would make Machiavelli proud. Peasants, once bound by the chains of serfdom, suddenly found themselves with bargaining chips. They demanded better wages and conditions, and who could blame them? They were like medieval free agents, ready to take their talents to the highest bidder. This didn't sit well with the nobility, who were used to calling the shots. In 1351, England passed the Statute of Labourers, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. Spoiler alert, it was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. The law was widely ignored, and peasants continued to negotiate for better deals, emboldened by their newfound leverage. Meanwhile, across the Channel, things were equally tumultuous. The French king, Philip VI, faced his own set of nightmares. Paris, a bustling hub of over 200,000 souls, was decimated by the disease. The capital became a ghost town, and the nobility was in disarray, dodging both the plague and the English. Philip's successor, John II, had to contend with a fractured kingdom and a depleted treasury, as the Black Death had drained both silver and soldiers. But not everyone was losing sleep over the situation. Some regions saw opportunity in the chaos. Take Milan, for instance. Under the shrewd leadership of the Visconti family, the city managed to weather the plague with relatively fewer casualties. They enforced a strict quarantine, closing their gates to outsiders, and rumor has it, even executing those who tried to break the cordon. Drastic, yes. Effective, also yes. While their neighbors floundered, the Viscontis strengthened their grip on power, leveraging their relative stability to expand their influence across northern Italy. Talk about turning lemons into limoncello. Meanwhile, the papacy was also on the ropes. Avignon, where the papal court had settled after fleeing Rome, was hit hard. Pope Clement VI, no stranger to the finer things in life, found his court racked by mortality rates that would make any modern statistician shudder. Amidst the chaos, he issued indulgences and absolutions like they were going out of style, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the flock. But even papal decrees couldn't stop the Grim Reaper from collecting his due. Primary sources from the time reveal a tapestry of fear, desperation, and political maneuvering. Chronicles like those of Jean Froissart paint a vivid picture of the era, capturing the tension and upheaval with a storyteller's flair. Froissart noted how the English and French, once bitter foes, were forced into uneasy truces, their armies decimated and their coffers empty. These moments of reluctant peace were like the eye of a hurricane, offering brief respite amidst the storm. The political landscape was a patchwork of shifting alliances and broken promises. Some rulers saw the plague as divine punishment, while others interpreted it as a chance to reshape their realms. The chaos allowed ambitious leaders to swoop in, annexing territories and consolidating power, while their neighbors struggled to bury the dead. It was as if the world had hit a reset button, and only the shrewdest players would emerge on top. As the afternoon light begins to wane, casting a golden glow over the plague-stricken town, it's clear that the political ramifications of the Black Death were as profound as they were complex. The plague was a catalyst, accelerating changes that had been simmering beneath the surface. It exposed the fragility of medieval power structures, challenging the status quo and forcing leaders to adapt or perish. Whether through cunning diplomacy, ruthless pragmatism, or sheer luck, those who navigated these turbulent waters would shape the future of Europe in ways they could scarcely imagine. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the town with shades of twilight, it's time to reckon with the aftermath of this medieval calamity. The Black Death didn't just rewrite the rules, it tore up the rulebook and set it on fire. This plague wasn't just a temporary glitch in Europe's history. It was the seismic event that shook the continent out of its medieval slumber, setting the stage for the Renaissance, that grand era of rebirth. Now, let's not romanticize this transformation as some kind of phoenix rising elegantly from the ashes. It was more like a bedraggled cat, stumbling out of a nasty storm, wet, confused, but alive. The plague left Europe reeling, but it also forced a re-evaluation of just about everything: medicine, society, and governance. Remember those medieval doctors with their plague masks that made them look like avian nightmares? They were the best guess Europe had at the time for dealing with disease, based on a medical understanding that was largely an elaborate guessing game. The Black Death was a brutal reminder that the world needed better answers than let's bleed the patient and hope for the best. The aftermath of the Black Death saw a slow but sure shift towards more empirical approaches to medicine, paving the way for future advances. People began to question the old ways, leading to a gradual but undeniable push towards scientific inquiry. Books like The Canon of Medicine by Avicenna were dug out from dusty shelves, and the seeds for what would become modern medicine were sown. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, medical knowledge was blossoming faster than a spring daffodil, moving beyond the medieval reliance on astrology and superstition. Economically, the plague was a paradox wrapped in an enigma. On one hand, the massive loss of life meant labor was in short supply, which, as we've discussed, gave peasants newfound bargaining power. Wages rose, and serfdom began to crumble like a stale loaf of bread. On the other hand, the sudden drop in demand for goods and services initially crippled economies. Markets were ghost towns, and trade networks were like a tangled ball of yarn after a kitten's playtime. But here's where it gets interesting. This economic upheaval eventually led to a more dynamic and diversified economy. The shortage of workers spurred technological innovation and mechanization, foundations upon which the Renaissance economy would thrive. Socially and politically, the Black Death was the ultimate disruptor. Feudalism, that medieval pyramid scheme of power, began to wobble. With so many serfs missing in action, lords had to offer better terms to retain the ones that remained. Meanwhile, the middle class, those plucky townsfolk who survived, began to assert more influence. Their rise marked the slow death of feudalism and the birth of more modern governance structures. Monarchs, once untouchable, had to negotiate with a populace that was increasingly aware of its own power. This shift planted the seeds for later political developments, like the Magna Carta's principles, which would eventually flower into the democratic ideals of the Enlightenment. As for the myths, oh, the myths. The Black Death has inspired countless tales, some less accurate than others. The idea of the plague as some divine punishment is a narrative as old as time, but it's a simplistic explanation for a complex event. Yes, people may have turned to religion in their desperation, but attributing the plague solely to divine will ignore the very real, very earthly causes: fleas, rats, and human proximity. And while the dance of death and other macabre art forms flourished, they were more about confronting existential dread than celebrating it. The real story of the Black Death is one of human resilience, adaptation, and survival. And let's not forget the Renaissance itself, that fabled age of art and science. It wasn't so much a direct result of the plague as it was a beneficiary of the societal shifts the plague triggered. The plague demolished the old order, clearing the way for new ideas to take root. Cities like Florence became hotbeds of creativity and innovation, not because of the plague, but because the vacuum it left demanded new ways of thinking. The Renaissance was less a sudden explosion of genius and more a gradual dawn after a long, dark night. So, as you wrap up your day in this medieval horror show, reflect on the paradox that is the Black Death's legacy. It was both a catastrophe and a catalyst. It brought unimaginable suffering, yet it also spurred humanity to question, to learn, and ultimately to grow. In the end, the plague didn't just reshape Europe, it reshaped what it meant to be human. That's a legacy worth remembering, even if it's one marked by pain and perseverance. And so, as the town falls silent, with only the whisper of the past in the cool night air, take a moment to appreciate the resilience of those who came before. Their struggles, their triumphs, and their failures all paved the way for the world we know today. History is a tapestry woven with threads of tragedy and triumph, and the Black Death is one of its darkest, yet most transformative chapters. As you leave this medieval town behind, carry with you the lessons of resilience and the relentless march of progress, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that humanity's greatest strength is its ability to endure, adapt, and eventually to flourish. Athens in the 5th century BCE was like the ultimate ancient mashup of Broadway, Hollywood, and a bit of the Wild West. Let's set the scene. A city brimming with philosophers, politicians, and people who really knew how to rock a toga. Amongst this bustling metropolis, theatre wasn't just a cultural pastime, it was a full-blown civic duty. And the Dionysia Festival. Think of it as the Coachella of the ancient world, minus the Instagram influencers, but with a lot more existential angst. The Dionysia was basically the Super Bowl of drama, dedicated to Dionysus, the god of wine and theatre. Because, of course, the Greeks knew that the best performances involved a little liquid courage. Every spring, the city transformed into a hive of artistic activity, as playwrights, actors, and spectators from all over Greece descended on Athens like seagulls on a dropped piece of pita bread. This was the event where up-and-coming playwrights could become household names, assuming they could impress the notoriously fickle Athenian audience and the equally capricious panel of judges. But let's talk about the economics of the theatre scene, because if you think today's Broadway tickets are pricey, wait until you hear about the ancient system. The theatre wasn't just funded by the state. No, the real money came from the rich patrons known as Chorga. These were the deep-pocketed sponsors who fronted the cash for everything from costumes and props to training the chorus. In return, they got the ancient equivalent of having their name in lights, a marble plaque commemorating their generosity. Because who needs a yacht when you can have your name etched in stone for eternity? The whole setup was less about altruism and more about prestige. The Chorgoi were often vying for political clout and social standing. Sponsoring a successful play could elevate one's status faster than you can say, Euripides. And let's not forget, the city of Athens was infamous for its competitive spirit. Winning at the Dionysia was like scoring a political touchdown. The victorious Chorgos didn't just get a pat on the back. They earned serious bragging rights and a solid boost to their public profile. Now, if you're thinking the theatre was all about highbrow art and culture, Think again. The Athenians loved a good comedy as much as a tragedy. Aristophanes, one of the most famous playwrights of the era, was the master of satire, skewering everything from politicians to philosophers with a sharp wit that still resonates today. His plays were the ancient equivalent of a roast, complete with biting commentary and slapstick humor. And let's not forget the tragedies: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, whose works explored themes of fate, justice, and the occasional dysfunctional family drama. But theatre in ancient Greece was more than just an entertainment spectacle. It was a reflection of the society's values, fears, and aspirations. The plays often tackled pressing issues of the day, like war, democracy, and the human condition. They were a way for the Athenians to engage with and critique their world, wrapped up in a package of myth and performance. And boy, did they love a good myth, whether it was a tale of gods behaving badly or heroes on impossible quests. The theatre itself was a marvel of engineering. The theatre of Dionysus, nestled on the slopes of the Acropolis, could seat up to 17,000 spectators. That's about the same as a modern-day sports arena. Built in a semicircular design, the theatre had acoustics so good that even the cheap seats could hear every dramatic whisper and comedic punchline. There were no microphones or amplifiers, just the power of the human voice and the strategic use of masks to amplify sound, a neat trick that also helped actors play multiple roles. As the festival progressed, the city was abuzz with anticipation. The streets were alive with the chatter of citizens debating which playwright would take home the coveted first prize. Meanwhile, vendors sold all manner of snacks to the thronging crowds because, let's face it, no cultural event is complete without a bit of ancient fast food. The whole event was an exercise in organized chaos, and the Athenians loved every minute of it. Yet behind the glamour and the glory, the reality of theatre was a bit grittier. The actors, who were all male regardless of the role, often faced grueling schedules and the pressure to perform at the top of their game. The chorus, an integral part of Greek theatre, required rigorous training to perfect the synchronized movements and chants that added depth to the performances. And let's not forget the playwrights, who had to balance creativity with the whims of public taste and the ever-present threat of censorship. In the end, theatre in ancient Athens was a microcosm of the society itself, rich in culture, fraught with competition, and always striving for excellence. It was a place where the boundaries between myth and reality blurred, where the voices of the past echoed through the marble seats, and where the spirit of Dionysus infused every performance with a touch of divine madness. So next time you settle into a comfy seat at your local theatre, spare a thought for those ancient Greeks who, with a bit of marble and a lot of drama, laid the foundations for the theatrical world we know today. Behind the scenes of ancient Greek theatre, the real drama was just getting started. Imagine a bustling backstage filled with actors, or hypocrites, a word that literally means answerer, but has since taken on a whole new life. These performers weren't just answering the call of the stage. They were transforming into the larger-than-life characters of myth and legend, all while wearing masks that could double as dinner plates. Let's talk about these masks for a second. Far from the delicate, crafted masks you might expect, they were more like theatrical megaphones. Made from linen or wood, these oversized facial covers were the ancient equivalent of an actor's toolkit, complete with exaggerated expressions to help convey emotion to the back row of the 17,000-seat theatre of Dionysus. And if you're wondering how these masks stayed on during all that dramatic gesticulation, they were tied on with a strategic use of ribbons. Forget method acting. This was method masking. But the masks served another crucial purpose. They allowed actors to play multiple roles in a single performance. With a quick change of mask, an actor could go from a heartbroken hero to a scheming villain faster than you can say, Sophocles. This was essential because all the actors were male, regardless of whether they were playing the role of a Greek god or goddess. So next time you're rooting for the underdog in a play, remember that the guy playing Antigone was probably the same fellow who played her brother Eteocles. Now let's pivot to the chorus, those enthusiastic background artists who were anything but background noise. Imagine them as the ancient Greek version of a Greek chorus. Yes, the name stuck for a reason, except they sang, danced, and occasionally stole the show. Made up of 12 to 15 performers, the chorus was an essential part of the theatrical experience, providing commentary, moving the plot along, and sometimes serving as the moral compass of the story. They were like the original hype men, only with more choreography and a lot less bling. Training the chorus was no easy feat. These performers underwent rigorous rehearsals to perfect their synchronized movements and chants. Picture a group of men, again, all men, moving and vocalizing in perfect harmony, a feat that required as much discipline as it did talent. The chorus was the glue that held the performance together, providing exposition, foreshadowing events, and sometimes even addressing the audience directly. If you think breaking the fourth wall is a modern invention, think again. The Greeks were doing it long before Deadpool made it cool. Let's debunk another myth while we're at it, the toga-clad actor. While the image of ancient Greeks swanning around in togas is as iconic as it is incorrect, the reality was a bit more practical. In reality, actors wore garments called chitons, long tunics that were belted at the waist. These costumes were often elaborately decorated and dyed in vivid colors to help the audience differentiate between characters. If you've ever tried to navigate a character-heavy playbill, you'll appreciate the ancient Greeks' attention to sartorial detail. And let's not forget the platform shoes, kothurni, worn by actors to give them a literal leg up on the competition. These elevated shoes, which could add several inches to an actor's height, were a practical necessity for ensuring visibility. Plus, they added a certain gravitas to tragic roles, because nothing says serious drama like towering over your co-stars. It's worth noting that the kothurni were as much a fashion statement as they were a functional addition to the costume. Move over, stilettos. These shoes were the original high heels. Of course, dressing for the stage wasn't just about aesthetics. It was also a reflection of the economic and social structures of the time. Costumes and masks were funded by the Korga, those wealthy patrons who bankrolled the productions. And just like today's theatre producers who jostle for a Tony Award, these patrons were looking for prestige and influence in return for their investment. As the actors donned their costumes and masks, they weren't just preparing for a performance. They were stepping into a world where myth and reality collided, where gods and mortals danced together on the same stage. The actors and chorus were more than just entertainers. They were vessels for storytelling, bridging the gap between the mortal and the divine. So, next time you hear the word hypocrite, spare a thought for those ancient Greek actors who, through their masks and kothurni, brought epic tales to life, echoing through the marble seats of a theatre that was as much about spectacle as it was about soul-searching. And as the curtain rose on another day of drama, the stage was set not just for a play, but for a performance that would resonate through the ages. As the actors and chorus prepared to take the stage, the theatre of Dionysus itself stood as a testament to human ingenuity and a whole lot of elbow grease. Constructing an amphitheatre in ancient Greece wasn't just about laying down some stone and hoping for the best. No, it was a marvel of engineering designed to captivate and carry the booming voices of actors to every one of those 17,000 eager ears. Built into the south slope of the Acropolis, the Theatre of Dionysus was an architectural feat that could give modern stadiums a run for their money. Forget your local multiplex. This was the real blockbuster venue. The semicircular design was more than just aesthetically pleasing. It was a masterclass in acoustics. The Greeks didn't have the luxury of Dolby surround sound, but they did have a keen understanding of acoustics and a lot of marble. And let's not forget the seating. Rows upon rows of stone benches that might have been murder on your back, but offered a panoramic view of the action. Now, before we start romanticizing this ancient venue too much, let's talk about the labor involved. Imagine the sweat and manpower required to quarry, transport, and carve all that marble. This was no weekend DIY project. It involved hundreds of workers, many of whom were likely slaves or low-paid laborers, toiling away under the Athenian sun. It's easy to get swept up in the grandeur of it all, but remember that every gleaming seat and perfectly placed stone came at a human cost. So, who were the masterminds behind the stories that filled these grandiose seats? Enter the playwrights, those literary rock stars of antiquity, whose works have echoed through the ages. Sophocles, the enigmatic genius, pennied over 120 plays, though only 7 have survived the test of time. Known for his complex characters and intricate plots, Sophocles was the dramatic equivalent of a fine wine. His work got better with age. Then there was Aristophanes, the original king of comedy, who wielded satire like a double-edged sword. With plays like Lysistrata, where women withhold sex to end a war, talk about a plot twist, he knew how to push boundaries and ruffle feathers. Aristophanes was like the Jon Stewart of his day, using humor to tackle serious issues and lampoon the political elite. His biting wit and fearless commentary have left us with a vivid snapshot of Athenian politics, where the line between comedy and reality was as thin as a toga's hem. And speaking of politics, let's not gloss over the fact that these plays weren't just entertainment. They were a reflection of the soap opera that was Athenian democracy. Picture a society where citizens gathered to watch plays that critiqued their leaders and questioned the status quo. In a world where freedom of speech was as fragile as a Greek vase, the playwrights walked a delicate line between daring and dangerous. They had to navigate the whims of a society that could be as fickle as the gods they often portrayed. Let's dive into those gods and heroes for a moment. The Greeks loved a good myth, but their portrayals were far from the sanitized versions we get in today's family-friendly adaptations. These weren't your run-of-the-mill, halo-wearing deities. The gods of Greek theatre were as flawed and petty as the mortals who worshipped them. Zeus, the king of the gods, was notorious for his wandering eye and questionable morals. And then there's Apollo, whose oracle at Delphi could give the magic 8-ball a run for its money with its cryptic prophecies. But perhaps the real appeal of these divine tales was their ability to mirror human nature in its truest form. The heroes of Greek plays were often deeply flawed individuals, grappling with hubris, ambition, and the occasional bout of patricide. Take Oedipus, for example, a man whose fate was sealed by a prophecy and whose tragic story continues to resonate with audiences today. These tales weren't just stories of gods and heroes. They were allegories for the human condition, exploring themes of fate, power, and the eternal struggle between right and wrong. This blend of myth and reality allowed playwrights to explore the complexities of life in a way that was both entertaining and thought-provoking. The stories served as a societal mirror, reflecting the values, conflicts, and aspirations of the time. They challenged audiences to question their beliefs and consider the consequences of their actions. In an era where the gods were as real as the person sitting next to you in the theatre, these plays provided a safe space to explore the big questions without fear of divine retribution. So, as the actors took their places and the chorus prepared to sing, the audience settled in for a performance that was as much about spectacle as it was about soul-searching. The amphitheatre buzzed with anticipation, a living testament to the power of storytelling to unite, challenge, and inspire. And as the first words echoed through the marble seats, the stage was set for an experience that would transcend the boundaries of time, leaving an indelible mark on the tapestry of human history. As we continue this journey into the heart of ancient Greek theatre, remember that the stories told on those ancient stages were as much about the world off-stage as they were about the gods and heroes who inhabited them. The theatre was a place where art and life intertwined, where the lines between myth and reality blurred, and where the spirit of Dionysus danced in every shadow and whisper. So stay tuned, because there's more drama, intrigue, and ancient wisdom to uncover in the next act of our exploration. As the curtain rose and the first actor's voice echoed through the ancient amphitheatre, the theatre of Dionysus transformed into a microcosm of Athenian society. It was a place where the city's vibrant social tapestry was on full display. From the high-ranking officials to the everyday citizens, all gathered to witness the drama unfold. And let's not kid ourselves. Where you sat during these performances said as much about your social standing as any toga or title ever could. The seating arrangements in the theatre were a perfect reflection of the rigid social hierarchy that defined Athens. At the front, closest to the action, sat the priests and dignitaries, the VIPs of the ancient world. These seats of honor, known as the prodria, were prime real estate, offering a front-row view of the performance and a chance to be seen by everyone else. Because let's face it, half the fun of attending was being able to say, "I saw it all from the front row." Directly behind them sat the wealthy citizens, the kind who had the means to sponsor a play or two themselves. Their presence was a statement of power and influence, as much a part of the spectacle as the performance on stage. These were the Athenians who could afford the luxury of leisure, spending their days debating politics and philosophy, and their evenings critiquing the finer points of a tragic monologue. Further back in the less prestigious seats were the common citizens, the backbone of Athenian democracy. These men, and yes, it was primarily men, filled the rows with their chatter and anticipation, eager to see which playwright would capture the spirit of the times. For them, the theatre was more than just an escape. It was a civic duty, a chance to engage in the cultural discourse of the day. And while they might not have had the best seats in the house, they certainly had the loudest voices when it came to applause or boos. And then there were the women, a small contingent allowed in only during certain festivals, seated apart from the men in the back rows. Their presence was a nod to the inclusive nature of the Dionysia, yet a stark reminder of the gender dynamics that permeated every aspect of Greek life. In a society where public life was dominated by men, the theatre provided a rare opportunity for women to engage with the storytelling that shaped their world, even if from a distance. As the play unfolded, the audience was treated to a spectacle that was as much about entertainment as it was about politics and philosophy. The playwrights, those masterful architects of drama, knew how to weave powerful messages into their narratives, like a Trojan horse of ideas delivered on a stage. Comedy and tragedy were the vehicles of social commentary, deftly navigating the line between entertainment and enlightenment. In the comedies, playwrights like Aristophanes held a mirror to society, reflecting its absurdities and injustices with biting satire. His plays were like ancient Saturday Night Live sketches, skewering everyone from politicians to philosophers with a humor that was both cutting and clever. Take The Clouds, for instance, where he lampoons Socrates and the sophists, questioning the value of their philosophical musings in a world that seemed as chaotic as ever. Tragedies, on the other hand, delved into the darker aspects of the human condition. Playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides explored themes of fate, justice, and morality, forcing audiences to confront the complexities of life head-on. These plays were not mere stories. They were moral and ethical explorations, challenging the audience to reflect on their own beliefs and actions. For the Athenians, attending a tragedy was not just a cultural experience. It was a philosophical exercise, a chance to grapple with the big questions of existence. Theatre in ancient Athens was more than a pastime. It was a crucible of societal values and a testing ground for democratic ideals. The plays staged at the theatre of Dionysus provided a platform for public discourse, a way for citizens to engage with and critique the world around them. Whether through laughter or tears, the messages embedded in these performances resonated deeply, influencing the political and cultural landscape of the city. And let's not forget the role of the chorus, those synchronized storytellers who provided commentary and context, guiding the audience through the narrative. They were the collective voice of society, echoing the concerns and aspirations of the people. In many ways, the chorus acted as a bridge between the audience and the actors, drawing the spectators into the drama and inviting them to participate in the unfolding story. For the citizens of Athens, attending the theatre was a communal experience, a chance to come together and share in the cultural life of the city. It was a space where art and politics intersected, where the lines between performer and audience blurred, and where the spirit of democracy was alive and well. In a world where public discourse was paramount, the theatre served as a vital forum for the exchange of ideas, a place where every voice could be heard, even if it came from the back row. So, as the final act drew to a close, and the echoes of applause filled the stone amphitheatre, the audience knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The theatre had done its job, stirring emotions, provoking thought, and reinforcing the bonds of community. For the Athenians, it was a reminder of the power of storytelling to inspire change, a testament to the enduring legacy of a society built on the principles of dialogue and debate. As the sun set over the Acropolis, casting long shadows across the ancient stage, the citizens of Athens returned to their lives, carrying with them the lessons and reflections of the day's performance. The theatre had left its mark, a reminder that even in a world of gods and heroes, it was the stories of human struggle and triumph that resonated most deeply. And as they dispersed into the bustling streets, the spirit of Dionysus lingered, weaving its way through the city, whispering stories yet to be told. And while the Athenians may have dispersed into the bustling streets with the echoes of drama still ringing in their ears, they left behind a legacy that would ripple through the centuries like a stone skipped across the Aegean. You see, the ancient Greeks didn't just lay the foundation for theatre. They built the stage for modern storytelling as we know it. Whether you're binge-watching a Netflix series or lining up for the latest blockbuster, you can thank those toga-clad thespians for the narrative structures and archetypes that continue to captivate audiences today. Take the concept of catharsis, for instance. It's that gut punch of emotion you feel when a character finally gets their comeuppance, or when a plot twist leaves you slack-jawed and staring at the screen. Aristotle, who was basically the Roger Ebert of ancient Greece, first introduced this idea in his Poetics. He argued that tragedy's power lay in its ability to purge the audience's emotions, much like a psychological cleanse with a side of philosophical debate. This ancient therapy session is still alive and well in today's dramas, where we love to see the antihero rise and fall, all while clutching our metaphorical popcorn. But let's not pretend it was all doom and gloom in the Greek theatre. Sure, we've got our tragic heroes like Oedipus, who really should have read the fine print on that prophecy. But there's also a rich tradition of comedy that proves the Greeks knew how to laugh at themselves. Aristophanes, with his razor-sharp wit, taught us that satire could be a powerful tool for social commentary, kind of like how The Simpsons does it today, but with fewer yellow characters and more political jabs. His plays poked fun at everything from the warmongering tendencies of Athens to the philosophical musings of Socrates. In fact, if you think cancel culture is a modern invention, consider that Aristophanes, the Clouds, was accused of contributing to Socrates' trial and eventual execution. Talk about a critic's dream gone wrong. And while we're debunking myths, let's tackle another, that Greek theatre was a stoic, solemn affair. In reality, the Athenians knew how to throw a festival. The Dionysia was a riot of colour, sound, and sometimes rowdy spectators who might have indulged in a little too much of Dionysus' favourite beverage. The atmosphere was closer to a football match than a quiet evening at the theatre. The audience's reactions were as much a part of the performance as the actors themselves, with cheers and jeers echoing through the marble seats. If you've ever been to a midnight screening of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, you've experienced a sliver of what an ancient Greek theatre might have been like, minus the fishnets. But the real magic of Greek theatre lies in its ability to transcend time and space. It's ironic, isn't it? A society that thrived on questioning everything from politics to the nature of existence ended up creating stories that would resonate with future generations, long after the marble of the Acropolis had started to crumble. Those tales of gods and mortals, of fate and free will, have been retold, reimagined, and reinterpreted in countless ways. They are the backbone of Western literature, the blueprint for narrative arts, and the heartbeat of our cultural imagination. Consider the modern hero's journey, a narrative arc that owes a debt to Greek dramatic structure. From Luke Skywalker to Katniss Everdeen, the journey from ordinary to extraordinary, from reluctance to resolution, echoes the trials of Hercules and the quests of Odysseus. These timeless stories taught us that the best narratives are not just about the destination, but the transformation along the way. And if you're ever stuck in a writer's block, just remember, if it worked for Homer, it'll probably work for you. In essence, the Greeks gave us the tools to explore the human condition through stories that question, challenge, and entertain. It's a legacy that has outlived the city-states of ancient Greece, weathered the rise and fall of empires, and adapted to the digital age with remarkable ease. The theatre's influence is woven into the very fabric of our storytelling, from the dramatic arcs of HBO dramas to the comedic beats of sitcoms. It's a testament to the enduring power of narrative to reflect and shape the world around us. As we wrap up this journey through the ancient world of Greek theatre, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of those ancient playwrights. They dared to put humanity on stage, warts and all, and in doing so, they left us with a treasure trove of wisdom and wit. So next time you find yourself engrossed in a gripping drama or chuckling at a clever comedy, spare a thought for the Greeks who started it all. Because while their gods may have faded into myth, their stories continue to resonate, proving that some things, like a good tale, are truly timeless. And there you have it, folks. The curtain may have fallen on ancient Greek theatre, but its legacy is still very much alive and kicking. From the marble seats of the theatre of Dionysus to the glow of your TV screen, the power of storytelling endures, reminding us that while the world may change, the stories that define us remain as compelling as ever. So here's to the Greeks, the original masters of drama and comedy, whose tales of gods and heroes continue to inspire and entertain. And as they say in the theatre world, break a leg. In the dusty annals of history, where the spotlight often misses its mark, the kingdom of Kush stands like a forgotten star. Nestled in the shadow of ancient Egypt's grandeur, Kush was the underdog with the tenacity of a seasoned marathon runner. Around 1070 BCE, the kingdom of Kush emerged in the region we now know as Sudan. While Egypt was busy chiseling its legacy into stone, Kush was quietly flexing its muscles, waiting for its moment in the sun. Yes, Kush was the hipster of ancient empires, thriving before it was cool. Let's talk geography because, surprise, it matters a lot. The capital of Kush, Napata, was strategically perched along the Nile, the ancient world's version of a highway. Not just any highway, but one that connected Africa to the Mediterranean. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was the lifeblood of civilizations. Napata's choice location was no accident. It was like setting up a lemonade stand at the crossroads of busy trade routes. You're bound to make a splash. This positioning allowed Kush to become a trading powerhouse, swapping goods like gold, ivory, and exotic animals with cultures far and wide. Think of it as the Amazon of the ancient world, minus the drones and next-day delivery. Kush's relationship with Egypt was the stuff of daytime drama, full of intrigue, alliances, and occasional familial squabbles. For centuries, Egypt saw Kush as a bit of a younger sibling, sometimes welcoming, sometimes patronizing, but always with an eye on its resources. There were times when Egypt controlled Kush, extracting resources like a needy friend, constantly borrowing your charger. But Kush wasn't just a passive player, it had its eyes on the throne. And oh boy, did they get their turn. The Kushites were not only adept at commerce, but also served as a cultural bridge. They absorbed Egyptian influences like hieroglyphics and pyramids, but with their own twist. Kushite pyramids were steeper and more numerous. Picture Egypt's sleek pyramids, then imagine them multiplied and redesigned with a touch of local flair. This cross-cultural exchange meant that while Egypt was the loud superstar, Kush was the indie band with a dedicated following. Now, if you're wondering why history books often gloss over Kush, blame the dusty lens of Eurocentrism. The spotlight of historical narrative has a notorious habit of focusing on Europe and brushing past African empires, unless they had a direct confrontation with Europe or its classical predecessors. Kush, with its complex society and impressive achievements, got nudged to the historical footnotes. But make no mistake, Kush was no sideshow. It was an empire that built cities, conquered territories, and left a legacy that still fascinates scholars today. Kush also had a knack for myth-busting before it was trendy. While Egypt's grand narratives were carved in stone, Kush's history was woven into the fabric of trade, warfare, and diplomacy. The kingdom was a master of adaptation, navigating the political landscapes of its time with the skill of a chess grandmaster. It wasn't just about muscle. It was about strategy, survival, and making your mark in a world dominated by giants. In the grand theatre of ancient history, Kush was the underdog that refused to stay in the shadows. It was a place where culture and commerce collided, creating a vibrant tapestry that connected continents. It was a land of contrasts and conquests, where the past was not just remembered, but lived, and where every stone laid in Napata told a story of ambition and resilience. Kush's early interactions with Egypt were a complex dance of power and influence. They weren't just trading partners, they were rivals and allies rolled into one. Egypt's fascination with Kush's wealth led to numerous invasions, but Kush was not a silent bystander. It absorbed Egyptian culture while maintaining its unique identity, creating a blend that was both familiar and exotic. When Egypt faltered, Kush seized the opportunity to push back, even ruling Egypt for a time as the 25th dynasty under the rule of legendary kings like Pir and Taharqa. These were the moments that turned the tables and etched Kush into the annals of power. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life in Kush wasn't just a series of triumphs and trade deals. It was a rugged existence, shaped by the harsh realities of the African landscape. The Nile's annual flooding was both a boon and a bane, leaving fertile soil in its wake, but also the constant threat of destruction. The empire's people were as resilient as the land they inhabited, working tirelessly to build a civilization that could withstand the test of time. This wasn't just survival. It was an enduring testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. In the grand mosaic of history, the kingdom of Kush may have been overshadowed by its more famous neighbors, but it was no less significant. It was a realm that defied expectations, a testament to the fact that history is not just written by the victors, but by those who dare to dream beyond their horizons. The tale of Kush is one of resilience, ambition, and a reminder that the past is never truly forgotten, as long as there are those willing to unearth its stories. Now, while the kingdom of Kush was busy dodging Egypt's shadow and etching its own mark on history, it wasn't just the allure of gold, ivory, and those exotic animals that kept the cogs of its mighty empire turning. Enter Merere, the Kushite city that was the ancient world's answer to Silicon Valley, but with way more iron and zero-tech dross. Located about 200 kilometers northeast of modern-day Khartoum, Merere was anything but your run-of-the-mill iron production site. It was the industrial powerhouse that fueled Kush's economy and military, a veritable forge that breathed fire into the kingdom's aspirations. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. Iron production in Merere wasn't just about melting some metal and calling it a day. This was high-stakes alchemy, and the Meroitic people were the wizards of their craft. By the 6th century BCE, Merere was cranking out iron like it was going out of style. We're talking about a production so vast that it left a landscape littered with slag heaps, the discarded remnants of an iron-making process that was both an art and a science. Imagine a city where the sound of hammers on anvils was the soundtrack to daily life, and you'd be in the ballpark. Now, why was iron so important? Well, in the ancient world, iron was the equivalent of having a cutting-edge smartphone in your pocket. It was the material that strengthened armies and boosted economies. Kushite blacksmiths were crafting weapons that were sharper than the wits of their fiercest critics, and tools that revolutionized agriculture. This wasn't just about keeping up with the Joneses. It was about outpacing them in an iron-clad sprint. If you're wondering how this played out on a grander scale, let's talk trade routes. Merere wasn't isolated in its iron obsession. The city was a crucial node in a vast network that extended across the African continent and beyond. Picture bustling trade caravans snaking through the deserts, laden with iron goods headed to distant lands. The reach of Kushite iron was impressive, finding its way into the heart of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and some say even as far as India. This wasn't just trade. It was globalization before it was cool, minus the internet and the occasional tariff war. But let's dial it back a bit. Trading iron wasn't the only gig in town. Kush was a veritable smorgasbord of trade delights, with routes that brought in everything from incense and textiles to exotic hardwoods and spices. These were the ancient world's luxury goods, the must-haves for any self-respecting ruler or merchant worth their salt. And speaking of salt, that was another hot commodity flowing through these trade arteries. Kush was a melting pot of cultures and commerce, where goods and ideas mingled like guests at a lively dinner party. Now, behind the romantic notion of trade lay the harsh realities of logistics. Moving goods across vast distances was no casual stroll in the park. Caravans had to navigate treacherous terrains, unpredictable weather, and the occasional band of robbers with as much charm as a sandstorm. Yet this was the price of doing business in the ancient world, and the Kushites were nothing if not resourceful. They mastered the art of negotiation, diplomacy, and when necessary, a show of military might to secure their trade routes. This wasn't just about selling wares. It was about building an empire on the backbone of iron and the spirit of adventure. And let's not forget the military dimension. Iron production didn't just fill the coffers, it filled the armories. The Kushite military was a force to be reckoned with, kitted out with weapons that were the ancient equivalent of the latest military tech. Whether defending their borders or expanding their territory, the Kushites were armed with spears, swords, and shields that were the envy of their adversaries. This wasn't merely a battle for land. It was a battle for supremacy, a testament to the power that comes from mastering the elements. So, as we marvel at the industrious spirit of Merere, let's also acknowledge the blood, sweat, and tears that fueled this iron revolution. It wasn't all glory and riches. There were the grim realities of labor, the environmental toll, and the constant pressure to stay ahead of the curve. Yet, despite these challenges, Kush thrived, a testament to its people's resilience and ingenuity. In the grand narrative of history, the kingdom of Kush emerges not just as a footnote, but as a blazing chapter of innovation and ambition. It was a civilization that refused to be pigeonholed, that carved out its destiny with the tenacity of a blacksmith forging iron. As we delve deeper into the annals of Kush, let's keep our eyes peeled for the stories yet to unfold, the tales that remind us that history is a living tapestry, ever evolving and rich with the colors of human endeavor. Stay tuned, because the saga of Kush is far from over. Now, as we find ourselves knee-deep in the saga of Kush, let's swivel our attention to the powerhouse personalities who truly put the king in kingdom. Except plot twist, they were queens. Enter the Kandeks, or, as you might know them, the Candaces. These ladies weren't just sitting pretty on thrones. They were the real deal, leading armies, negotiating with foreign powers, and running the show with a flair that would make even the most seasoned political strategists today take notes. First up, let's bust the myth that these women were merely ceremonial figureheads, akin to some modern constitutional monarchs who spend more time cutting ribbons than cutting deals. The Kandeks were anything but ornamental. They were the heartbeat of Kushite politics, often wielding more power than their male counterparts. Take Queen Ammonines, for instance, who reigned during the 1st century BCE. She wasn't just content with ruling from the palace. She took to the battlefield, leading her troops against the Romans around 25 BCE. Imagine a queen who didn't just send the boys off to war, but rode alongside them, probably shouting tactical commands and dodging Roman arrows. That's the kind of leadership that leaves a mark, both in history and on the battlefield. Now, let's talk about their influence. The Kandeks weren't just about military might. They were master diplomats too. They understood the complex game of alliances and rivalries like a high-stakes poker match. In a world where Egypt loomed large, the Kandeks knew that to keep Kush thriving, they needed more than just sharp swords. They needed sharper wits. They played the diplomatic field with the finesse of a seasoned chess player, maneuvering through treaties and truces with the best of them. It's not too far-fetched to compare their strategic prowess to a modern-day politician who navigates international relations while keeping a poker face that would make Lady Gaga proud. And speaking of Egypt, let's dive into the rocky relationship between these two ancient powerhouses. The Kandakes had to contend with the ever-present shadow of their northern neighbor, a kingdom that was both a rival and a reluctant ally. At times, Egypt viewed Kush as a rebellious younger sibling, one who might borrow the car without asking, but occasionally shares the Spotify family plan. This love-hate dynamic was the backdrop for much of Kush's political maneuvering. The Kandakes were adept at this balancing act, leveraging their position whenever Egypt stumbled, like during the Third Intermediate Period, when Egypt was a patchwork of rival dynasties. Kush swooped in and seized the opportunity, even taking control of Egypt as the 25th dynasty, showing the world that this wasn't just a one-sided relationship. Now, don't get me wrong, this wasn't a fairy tale. The Kandakes faced their share of challenges and setbacks. The harsh realities of ancient geopolitics meant that sometimes even the best-laid plans could crumble under the weight of external pressures. The Romans, for instance, weren't exactly the most neighborly folks. After a series of clashes, the Kandakes had to negotiate a peace treaty with the Roman Empire. But here's the kicker. The terms were actually favorable to Kush, allowing them to retain their autonomy and even regain some lost territory. Talk about turning lemons into lemonade. In the grand scheme of things, the Kandakes' reigns were a testament to the power of adaptability and resilience. They navigated the tumultuous waters of ancient politics with a blend of charisma, cunning, and courage. This wasn't just about maintaining power. It was about ensuring the survival and prosperity of their people in a world where the stakes were as high as a Nile flood. So, as we marvel at the Kandakes' legacy, let's not forget the gritty reality behind the glamour. These were women who had to battle not just enemies on the battlefield, but the societal norms that would have preferred them to be mere footnotes in history. Instead, they became legends, proving that leadership knows no gender and that the true mark of a ruler is not just the crown they wear, but the legacy they leave behind. As we dive deeper into the annals of Kush, let's keep the momentum building. There's more to uncover about this enigmatic kingdom and its indomitable leaders. The saga of the Kandakes is far from over, and the tales yet to come promise to be as riveting as the ones we've explored. So stay tuned, because history is nothing if not full of surprises, and the kingdom of Kush has plenty more stories to tell. So, just when you thought the Kandakes were the only stars in this historical drama, let's pivot to another scene stealer from Kush, its cultural and religious landscape. If you thought Egypt had the monopoly on gods with animal heads and pyramids that defy the laws of physics, think again. Kush was no slouch in the spiritual and architectural departments, and they had their own spin on divine matters that made the Nile's southern banks a fascinating place to be. First off, let's talk about the religious remix that happened in Kush. Picture a Spotify playlist where Egyptian gods are the headliners, but local deities get their feature tracks. This fusion wasn't just about borrowing. It was about blending. The Kushites adopted Egyptian gods like Ammon, Isis, and Osiris, but they didn't just copy-paste them into their pantheon. Oh no, they gave these deities a Kushite makeover. Ammon, for instance, was worshipped in a form that was distinctively Nubian, with the ram-headed god being depicted in ways that felt more at home under the African sun than the shadow of the pyramids up north. And speaking of pyramids, here's a little nugget that might blow your mind. Nubia has more pyramids than Egypt. Yep, you heard that right. The kingdom of Kush decided to one-up their northern neighbors with an architectural spree that left the desert dotted with these stone marvels. By the time the Kushite pyramid-building frenzy had settled, they had constructed over 200 pyramids, outnumbering their Egyptian counterparts. It's like they took one look at Giza and said, "Hold my beer." Now, before you start picturing these pyramids as colossal replicas of their Egyptian cousins, let's set the record straight. Kushite pyramids were smaller, steeper, and arguably more numerous. Imagine a pyramid that looks like it's trying to pierce the heavens with its sharp angles. They might not have the grandeur of the Great Pyramid of Giza, but they had their own charm, a sort of scrappy underdog vibe that resonates with the kingdom's overall narrative. Why all this pyramid building, you ask? Well, it was as much about status as it was about spirituality. The Kushites saw pyramids as a way to honor their dead royals, a grand final resting place that signified power and divinity. These structures were less about housing treasures and more about embodying the spirit of the afterlife, a place where the kings and queens of Kush could continue their reign in the land beyond. It's a testament to the Kushite belief in the continuity of life and power, a celestial CEO suite, if you will. But let's not get too carried away with the romanticism of pyramids. Building these stone giants was no walk in the park. It required a workforce of skilled laborers, architects who understood geometry better than a high school math teacher, and an economy that could support such grand projects without collapsing like a house of cards. This was a time-consuming and resource-intensive endeavor, and the Kushites were in it for the long haul. Now, back to the gods. The religious landscape of Kush was a cultural mosaic, a tapestry woven with threads from Egypt, local traditions, and perhaps even influences from farther afield. The Kushite priesthood played a crucial role in this spiritual tapestry, acting as intermediaries between the people and the divine. Temples were not just places of worship. They were centers of power and learning, where priests studied astronomy, mathematics, and the arts alongside their religious duties. It's as if the temples were ancient think tanks, shaping the intellectual and spiritual life of Kush. And let's not forget the festivals, those grand celebrations that brought communities together in a swirl of color, music, and ritual. These were not just religious observances, but social events that reinforced bonds and hierarchies within the society. Picture a Mardi Gras with a side of solemnity, where the divine and the mundane danced in a delicate balance. But here's where it gets interesting. The Kushites weren't just passive recipients of Egyptian culture. They were active shapers of it. When the 25th dynasty of Kush ruled over Egypt, they brought their own cultural elements into the heart of the Nile Valley, influencing the art, architecture, and religious practices of their northern subjects. This was cultural exchange on a grand scale, a two-way street that enriched both civilizations. In the grand narrative of human history, the cultural and religious life of Kush serves as a reminder that identity is not a static thing. It's a living, breathing entity that evolves and adapts, that absorbs and transforms. The kingdom of Kush was not just a shadow of Egypt. It was a vibrant, dynamic culture that stood proudly in its own right. It challenged the norm, embraced the new, and in doing so left a legacy that still prompts a double-take from historians today. So, as we continue to peel back the layers of Kush, let's keep the momentum rolling. There's more to uncover, more tales waiting to be told. Stay tuned, because the saga of Kush is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting as the last. While Kush was busy dazzling the ancient world with cultural flair and ironclad innovation, the sands of time were quietly shifting beneath its feet, setting the stage for a grand exit. The decline of Kush wasn't a Hollywood-style crash and burn. It was more like a slow fade-out, with environmental changes, economic shifts, and a few invasions thrown in for good measure. In a world where the only constant is change, even empires must eventually face the music. Let's start with the environment, nature's way of reminding us who's really in charge. Around the 4th century CE, the climate decided it was time for a little chaos, and Kush was caught in the crossfire. The once reliable Nile, the kingdom's lifeline, started acting like an unreliable narrator in a thriller novel. Its flooding became unpredictable, turning fertile lands into arid stretches. Agriculture, the backbone of Kush's economy, took a hit harder than a drummer in a rock band. With less food to go around, the kingdom found itself on shaky ground, struggling to maintain its populace and its power. But it wasn't just Mother Nature playing hardball. The shifting trade routes, those ancient arteries of commerce, found new paths that bypassed Kush. The rise of the Aksumite Empire to the southeast didn't help either. Aksum became the new darling of trade, with its strategic position along the Red Sea, drawing merchants like moths to a flame. Kush was like the former prom queen, suddenly ignored at the reunion. Its once bustling trade networks began to resemble ghost towns, with fewer caravans and less clinking of gold coins. Let's not forget the human element. There's always someone ready to seize an opportunity. In the 4th century CE, the kingdom faced a series of invasions from nomadic tribes, including the Noba and the Blemmyes, who were less interested in diplomatic niceties and more in staking their claim. These incursions chipped away at Kush's defenses, like termites gnawing at the foundations of a grand mansion. And as if that wasn't enough, the rise of Christianity in Nubia introduced a new cultural wave, one that eroded traditional Kushite beliefs and practices, further weakening the kingdom's unity. By the time the dust settled, the once mighty Kush was a shadow of its former self, with its capital shifted from Merere to a less illustrious locale before it faded from the historical stage entirely. It was a gradual unraveling, a slow-motion collapse that left behind a landscape dotted with ruins and echoes of past grandeur. The decline of Kush serves as a stark reminder that even the greatest of empires are not immune to the whims of fate and the relentless march of time. Fast forward a few centuries, and Kush becomes the stuff of legend buried beneath layers of sand and obscurity. For the longest time, its story was overshadowed by the grandeur of Egypt, tucked away in the footnotes of history books that preferred tales of European exploits. But in the 19th century, the world began to take notice, thanks to the efforts of archaeologists who refused to let Kush remain a forgotten whisper. It was as if the world suddenly realized it had been sitting on a treasure trove of history, and the dig for answers began. Through meticulous excavations, scholars unearthed the remnants of Kushite civilization, piecing together the puzzle of a kingdom that had once rivaled the best of them. The discovery of Merere's iron forges and its pyramids, the artworks and inscriptions, all painted a picture of a society that was vibrant, dynamic, and deeply interconnected with its neighbors. The rediscovery of Kush was like finding a long-lost album from a band that had been unjustly overlooked, a reminder of the rich tapestry of human history beyond the well-trodden paths. Yet, despite these revelations, Kush still struggles to claim its rightful place in the annals of world history. The Eurocentric lens that has long dominated historical narratives often relegates African empires to the sidelines unless they intersected dramatically with European powers. It's a myopic view that dismisses whole chapters of human achievement, and Kush is a prime example of this oversight. Its legacy is not just in its monuments and artifacts, but in the cultural exchanges and innovations that shaped the ancient world. So, as we wrap up this journey through the sands of time, let's give Kush the standing ovation it deserves. This was an empire that dared to dream big, that built bridges, cultural and literal, across continents, and that left a mark on history that is both profound and poignant. In a world obsessed with winners and losers, Kush reminds us that history is richer than mere binaries, and that every story, no matter how buried, is worth telling. As we close the book on the Kingdom of Kush, let's carry its lessons forward. Let's question the narratives we've been fed, challenge the omissions, and recognize the brilliance of civilizations that defy easy categorization. The tale of Kush is not just about what was. It's about what can be, a testament to the power of resilience, ingenuity, and the enduring spirit of humanity. So here's to Kush, an empire that may have faded from power, but never from the annals of history. May its story continue to inspire, educate, and remind us of the vast and vibrant tapestry that is our shared past. The rooster's crow is your alarm, and it's time to shake off the straw bedding. Your back might protest, but it's not like you have memory foam waiting in the next room. Welcome to the life of a medieval blacksmith in the 14th century, where mornings start early and work begins before the sun's fully made its entrance. First things first, you make your way to the forge. No time for a leisurely breakfast. A hunk of bread and maybe some cheese if you're lucky is about all you get. The forge is your kingdom, albeit a smoky and sooty one, and it needs to be coaxed to life. Now here's the secret sauce. Getting that fire going is less about brute strength and more about technique. You carefully arrange yesterday's residual charcoal and add fresh bits, a practice that demands patience and precision because charcoal doesn't grow on trees. Well, it does, but you know what I mean. Charcoal, by the way, is your bread and butter. It's a hot commodity, pun intended, and costs you about 1 to 2 pence per bushel. That might not sound much, but when you consider that a skilled journeyman might earn around 4 pence a day, it puts the expense into perspective. You're not just a blacksmith. You're an economist in a leather apron, always calculating the fine line between profit and poverty. As the forge splutters to life, you've got a choice selection of tools laid out. Hammers, tongs, chisels. Your hands know these instruments like a bard knows his lute. But let's put a pin in the romanticism of the solitary genius wielding metal with poetic grace. The truth, you're not alone. Cue the apprentices. These young lads are your unpaid interns, learning the trade while doing the grunt work. They're the ones running around, fetching tools, and blowing the bellows to keep the fire hot. It's like a medieval version of an office intern fetching coffee, except with a lot more sweat and a slightly higher risk of third-degree burns. Now, let's talk iron. It's the lifeblood of your craft, and it doesn't come cheap. Iron in the 14th century is a precious resource, and you're looking at about £1 sterling for a ton. It sounds affordable until you realize £1 sterling is a whole month's earnings for a skilled worker. This isn't the era of mass production or Amazon Prime deliveries. Every piece of metal has to be sourced, smelted, and shaped with care. The economic realities are as gritty as the soot under your fingernails. You're a small business owner in a time when the concept of a small business loan is as fictional as dragons. Your livelihood depends on the local economy, and if the harvest is poor or war breaks out, you might be trading your skills for food instead of coins. The myth of the lone blacksmith hero, hammering out swords and plowshares in solitude, is charming but misleading. You're part of a bustling network of craftsmen, traders, and townsfolk. The blacksmith shop is a community hub, a medieval water cooler where news and gossip are exchanged along with goods. Your work supports the local economy. Without you, plows don't get fixed, horseshoes aren't replaced, and the knight's armor doesn't get that crucial repair before the next tournament. So, as you stand there, coaxing the forge to a roar, you're not just shaping metal, you're shaping the world around you. And let's face it, there's something undeniably satisfying about the clang of hammer on anvil echoing through the morning air. It's the original heavy metal soundtrack to your day, setting the rhythm for the work ahead. And so, as the clang of hammer on anvil echoes through the morning air, you're reminded that your work is the medieval version of an all-day DJ set, mixing skill and sweat with a side of soot. With the forge blazing hotter than a summer scandal, it's time to dive into the nitty-gritty of your mid-morning tasks, crafting and repairing the everyday essentials that keep your medieval world spinning. First up on today's playlist, horseshoes. Forget the modern image of leisurely horseback rides through the countryside. Back in the 14th century, horses were the engines of agriculture, trade, and war. A horse without a shoe is like a car without tires, going nowhere fast. Your job is to ensure the local steeds are ready to hoof it across cobblestones and fields. Crafting a single horseshoe might sound straightforward, but it's a symphony of heat, timing, and a whole lot of muscle memory. You've got to get the iron to the perfect temperature, somewhere around a toasty 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and shape it just right to fit the unique hoof of each horse. One size does not fit all in the world of equine footwear. Now, if you think you can just bang out a horseshoe in 10 minutes flat, think again. Each one takes about half an hour, and that's when you're not distracted by the latest village drama. The cost of a set, around 4 pence, roughly a day's wage for the average worker. It's a fair chunk of change, but without those shoes, a horse might as well retire to the pasture. And let's face it, a knight charging into battle barefoot is about as effective as a butter knife in a sword fight. But it's not all about horses and their fancy footwear. You've got to keep the local farmers happy, too. Enter the plowshare, the humble yet essential blade that turns soil into sustenance. Repairing these bad boys is a regular gig. Every time a plow hits a rock or a root, you're the one called in to patch it up. And while the work might sound monotonous, each repair is a chance to flex your technical prowess. Take that, modern multitaskers. The plowshare repair game is a fine balance between cost and craftsmanship. A new one might run 3 to 4 shillings, but most folks would rather pay you a few pence to make the old one serviceable again. And here's the kicker. Every bit of metal you use is a careful calculation. Waste not, want not, because iron's as precious as a royal decree. Your role in the local economy is akin to a modern-day mechanic, keeping the wheels of agriculture turning smoothly. But let's shatter one more myth while we're at it. The idea that blacksmiths are solitary artisans, hidden away like medieval hermits. The reality, you're more like a social butterfly with a hammer. The forge is a buzzing hive of activity. Farmers, traders, and townsfolk come by not just to pick up their goods, but to exchange news, swap stories, and maybe even gossip about the Lord's latest faux pas. You're at the center of this medieval social network, linking people and ideas with every clang of your hammer. Your trade network extends far beyond the village borders. Those raw materials you rely on, iron, charcoal, and even specialized tools, don't just appear out of thin air. They're the result of complex trade routes spanning regions. Imagine the medieval version of Amazon Prime, but with a few more horses and a lot less two-day shipping. You might source iron from a mine 100 miles away, and that charcoal. It's the product of careful negotiations with local woodcutters. Each piece of metal you shape is a testament to the vast web of commerce that underpins your craft. Mid-morning rolls into midday, and the forge is still alive with activity, the heat as relentless as a tax collector. As you work, you can't help but feel the weight of both tradition and innovation on your shoulders. You're not just following in the footsteps of blacksmiths before you. You're shaping the future of your community with every swing of the hammer. Whether it's a horseshoe or a plowshare, each piece you create or repair influences the local economy, keeping the wheels of medieval life turning. And so, the myth of the lone blacksmith hero fades into the reality of a vibrant, interconnected world. You're part of a dynamic community, your craft integral to the fabric of everyday life. It's not just about the metal you mold. It's about the impact you have on the lives of those around you. As the morning gives way to afternoon, the rhythm of your work continues, a constant reminder of the unyielding drive that defines your role in this medieval tapestry. By the time the afternoon sun casts its golden glow over the village, your forge is ablaze with activity. Gone are the morning's mundane tasks. Now you're stepping into the big leagues, custom orders for weapons and armor. It's the medieval equivalent of getting a call from a major league sports team, and you're the MVP of metallurgy. Here's the scoop. The 14th century is no stranger to conflict, what with England and France having a bit of a tiff known as the 100 Years' War. Spoiler alert, it lasts a tad longer than a century, but who's counting? And in this age of chivalry and chainmail, your role as a blacksmith is pivotal. You're not just making things that go clink and clank. You're crafting the tools of survival. Knights and soldiers are your clients, and they're in the market for more than just a shiny suit of armor. Let's talk swords. Ah, yes, the iconic weapon of medieval warfare, shrouded in romance and legend. But let's slice through the myth and get to the nitty-gritty. A well-crafted sword is a masterpiece of balance and precision, not just a shiny stick of metal. It's a blend of iron and a little carbon, transformed into steel through a process that's part science, part art, and a whole lot of sweat. A sword could run a noble a hefty sum, about 20 shillings or more, which is roughly the equivalent of a skilled labourer's half-year earnings. Talk about a serious investment. But what drives this demand for military hardware? Well, geopolitics, my friend. This period is riddled with power struggles, territorial disputes, and the occasional outburst of personal vendetta. Lords and kings are constantly flexing their muscles, both literally and figuratively, and they need their knights kitted out in the latest battle couture. Enter you, the blacksmith, the medieval equivalent of an arms dealer, crafting the tools that decide who gets to sit on the big chair, or at least which chair gets the footrest. Armor is another staple of your afternoon repertoire. Forget the Hollywood depiction of knights clanking around like oversized tin cans. Real armor is a marvel of engineering designed to protect while allowing mobility. The piece de résistance. Plate armor, a status symbol as much as a safeguard against arrows and sword strikes. A full suit could cost upwards of £40 sterling, a fortune that could buy a small estate. But for a knight, it's an investment in staying alive. And let's not overlook the economic angle. Wars are costly affairs, and not just for the combatants. The metal you work with is sourced from afar, often from mines as distant as the English Midlands. Transporting this iron is a logistical feat in itself, winding its way through trade routes that would make a modern supply chain manager break into a cold sweat. Each sword, each breastplate, is a testament to this intricate web of commerce, diplomacy, and sheer human tenacity. But before you get swept up in the romance of it all, let's pull back the curtain on the brutal reality of warfare. The image of noble knights charging gallantly into battle is, well, more a product of poetry than practicality. In truth, medieval warfare was a grim affair, fraught with chaos, mud, and a lot of yelling. And those knights, they were more likely to meet their end from disease or infection than a dramatic battlefield showed them. Yet the allure of honor and glory keeps fueling the forge and filling the coffers. Your status as a blacksmith, meanwhile, is a curious mix of respect and necessity. You're a craftsman of esteemed skill, but let's not pretend you're dining with the nobility. The records from the period, like those from the poll tax returns of 1377, show blacksmiths as part of the middling sort, respected but hardly rolling in luxury. Still, in a world where might often makes right, your ability to fashion the tools of war gives you a unique kind of power. As the afternoon wears on, the demands don't let up. Custom orders keep rolling in, each one more intricate than the last. A sword with a personalized hilt here, a suit of armor tailored to fit the broad shoulders of Sir Richard there. It's a symphony of fire and metal, a dance with danger where one wrong move could mean starting over, or worse, injury. Yet, for all the sweat and toil, there's a satisfaction in knowing your work is integral to the tapestry of medieval life. So, as the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across your workshop, you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow. The clang of metal still rings in your ears, a reminder that while the world may romanticize knights and their quests, it's the humble blacksmiths like you who arm them for the journey. And with that, you stoke the forge once more, ready to face whatever new challenges tomorrow might bring. But that's a story for another time, as the rhythm of your work continues, shaped by the ever-turning wheel of history. As the shadows stretch longer, and the forge's glow begins to feel like an old friend, it's time to wrap up the day. But hold your horses. Closing shop isn't as simple as flipping a sign from open to closed. There's a dance of duties to conclude, and it's not exactly a waltz through the tulips. First order of business, the forge. You've got to bank the fire, a task that sounds cozy but is actually a bit like babysitting a cranky toddler. You're covering the hot coals with ash to keep them smouldering overnight, ready to be rekindled with a little less effort in the morning. This isn't just about saving time, it's about saving resources. Charcoal costs you 1 to 2 pence per bushel. Remember, every ember counts. Now, let's talk about the tools of your trade. They're not going to clean themselves, and you won't find any medieval Roomba buzzing around the shop. Each hammer, anvil, and tong needs to be checked and maintained. After all, these aren't just implements. They're extensions of your hands, and they need to be ready for action come dawn. Besides, if a tool fails mid-task, you could be looking at more than just a delay. Try explaining a broken sword to a knight who's expecting it for tomorrow's joust. Once everything in the forge is squared away, it's time to tally up the day's earnings. Or, let's be honest, try to make sense of the scattered coins you've collected. The myth of the wealthy blacksmith is just that, a myth. Sure, you're not scraping by like a peasant, but neither are you swimming in riches like Scrooge McDuck. Those earnings, they're a careful balance of expenses and income, where every penny counts like it's auditioning for a spot on a medieval budget spreadsheet. Here's the brass tacks. On a good day, you might pull in around 6 to 8 pence. But factor in the costs of iron, charcoal, tools, and those occasional guild dues, and your profit margin is thinner than a monk's patience during Lent. Let's not forget taxes, because even in the 14th century, the taxman cometh. The poll tax returns of 1377 show blacksmiths as part of the taxable class, contributing their fair share to the royal coffers. It's a reminder that while the world changes, some things, like taxes, are as inevitable as the rising sun. Speaking of guilds, they're another piece of this economic puzzle. These medieval versions of trade unions are both a blessing and a burden. On one hand, they regulate quality and protect your trade secrets. No medieval knockoffs on their watch. On the other hand, they come with fees and rules that can feel as restrictive as a suit of armor on a hot summer's day. Still, being part of a guild lends you a certain status in the community. You're not just any blacksmith. You're a card-carrying member of a respected institution, and that comes with clout and the occasional side-eye from the local nobility. As you lock up the shop, the thought crosses your mind. Commerce in the medieval era is a complex beast. It's not just about selling goods. It's about navigating a web of social and financial obligations, from the humble villager needing a plowshare repaired to the lord commissioning a new set of armor. You're a linchpin in this economic ecosystem, a small business owner whose work supports the local economy in more ways than one. Yet even with these responsibilities, there's a certain freedom in your craft. You're beholden to no lord when it comes to your skills, and in a time when serfdom is still a reality for many, that's no small thing. Your forge is a space where you call the shots, where your expertise and hard work define the day's success. And in a world that's often dictated by birthright and privilege, that autonomy is as valuable as any pile of coins. As the evening breeze flows through the village, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the sound of distant laughter from the tavern, you're reminded of the social tapestry you're part of. The blacksmith shop isn't just a place of work. It's a gathering spot, a hub of commerce and conversation. People pass by, exchanging news and pleasantries, and you're at the heart of it all. It's a reminder that while the work is hard and the hours long, the connections you forge, pun intended, are what truly enrich this life. And so, as you make your way home, the weight of the day's labor balanced by the satisfaction of a job well done, you can't help but feel a sense of purpose. Your work supports a community, and your skills keep the wheels of medieval life turning. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to shape metal, and in turn, the world around you. For now, though, it's time to rest and recharge, ready to stoke the forge anew with the morning light. And as you sink into your straw bedding, the forge's glow still warming your thoughts, you can't help but marvel at the day's work. It's a life shaped by fire and iron, where every clang of the hammer echoes through the corridors of history. Tomorrow, the cycle begins anew, but tonight, let's wrap up this saga of soot and steel by pulling back the curtain on the full tapestry of a blacksmith's world. First up, let's crush that shiny myth of the solitary genius laboring away in noble silence. The truth is more like a bustling beehive than a lone wolf affair. Your workshop is a medieval microcosm, a blend of sweat, banter, and the steady rhythm of apprentice feet scurrying about. The blacksmith's role isn't just about swinging a hammer, it's about orchestrating a miniature economy. You're the maestro of metal, directing apprentices in a cacophony of clinks and clatters that would put any modern office to shame. Speaking of apprentices, these young whippersnappers are more than just background noise. They're your lifeline, learning the trade under your watchful eye while ensuring the forge doesn't sputter out mid-creation. Picture them as the medieval version of a startup's IT department, indispensable yet underappreciated. And while we're at it, let's debunk the romantic notion of the eager apprentice blossoming overnight into a master craftsman. The reality, it's a slog of 5 to 7 years, sweating it out in the forge day in and day out. Patience, it turns out, is as much a part of the craft as any tool. Now, let's get down to brass tacks about the blacksmith's place in the medieval social order. You're a middle-class hero, if you will, standing tall amidst the peasantry while still keeping an eye on the noble class strutting by. You don't live in a manor, but you certainly aren't ploughing fields from dawn till dusk either. Your work ensures the local economy keeps chugging along, and that earns you a measure of respect. But don't get too cocky. Remember, the poll tax of 1377 has you squarely in its sights, a reminder that no one escapes the taxman's grasp, not even the esteemed forger of swords. And speaking of swords, your workshop's output is as diverse as a medieval marketplace. From mundane tasks like shoeing horses and fixing plowshares to crafting the tools of war, your forge is the beating heart of the community. Let's not gloss over the fact that a well-crafted sword can be the difference between life and death on the battlefield. You're not just making metal objects. You're crafting the tools that define power structures, influence territorial squabbles, and quite literally change the course of history. Talk about a heavy responsibility. No pressure, right? But let's take a moment to appreciate the economic dance you're part of. Iron doesn't grow on trees, and neither does charcoal. Each piece of metal that passes through your hands is a testament to a vast and intricate trade network. This isn't some isolated cottage industry. It's a cog in the wheel of a massive medieval machine. From distant mines to local woodcutters, your supply chain stretches out like a spider's web. And whether you're aware of it or not, your small forge is linked to a global economy, influencing and being influenced by forces far beyond your village. Yet, for all this talk of commerce and community, there's a deeper significance to your craft. You're not just shaping metal, you're shaping identity. In a world where status is marked by the tools you wield and the armor you don, your work is a badge of honor, a symbol of skill and strength. The knights may get the glory, but you're the unsung hero ensuring their armor holds firm, their swords stay sharp. Without blacksmiths, the chivalric world would be a whole lot less shiny and significantly less effective. And just when you think you've wrapped your head around the blacksmith's multifaceted life, let's toss in one more nugget of reality versus romance. The notion that a blacksmith's life was somehow simpler or less stressful is, frankly, balderdash. Sure, you're not juggling emails or dealing with rush-hour traffic, but the stakes are as high as any modern-day boardroom. One misstep, one flawed blade, and you're staring down the barrel of a financial or reputational blow. It's a high-wire act, a delicate balance of art and pragmatism, where the rewards are as tangible as the risks. As you settle into a well-earned slumber, let's leave you with this thought. The life of a medieval blacksmith is a testament to the enduring human spirit. It's a story of grit, skill, and unyielding determination, played out against the backdrop of a vibrant, ever-evolving society. Your craft is as much about survival as it is about mastery, an intricate dance of fire and iron that shaped not only your community, but the very fabric of medieval life. So here's to you, the blacksmith, the unsung architect of history, whose legacy is forged in the fires of perseverance and skill. As you drift off to sleep, let the rhythm of your craft lull you into dreams of a world where your hands shape the destiny of nations, one hammer strike at a time. And who knows, maybe tomorrow's sunrise will bring a fresh batch of challenges, ready to be met with the same fire that fuels your forge and your spirit. You open your eyes to the muffled symphony of bustling feet and clattering pots echoing through the corridors of your Roman villa. The household staff is already in full swing, orchestrating the day like a well-rehearsed Roman play. It's not exactly a gentle alarm clock, but it gets the job done. The year is somewhere around 50 AD, and you're living in the epitome of what we might think of as ancient opulence. But hold that thought. Your villa is more than just a home, it's a statement. We're talking grandeur that could make even a modern-day real estate mogul raise an eyebrow. Welcome to the world of the atrium and peristyle garden. The atrium, the heart of the villa, is where the Romans would parade their wealth like peacocks showing off their feathers. Marble statues, intricate mosaics, and maybe even a small indoor pool known as an impluvium to catch rainwater. And let's not forget the peristyle, a garden surrounded by columns, offering an open-air retreat without leaving the comfort of your villa's confines. It's like having your personal slice of the countryside right in the middle of urban chaos. But let's talk about engineering marvels. The Romans didn't just stop at impressive architecture, they were the original innovators. Take the hypocaust system, for instance. Its central heating, ancient style. Imagine a series of raised floors supported by pillars, with hot air from a furnace circulating underneath to keep your toes toasty. Modern HVAC engineers might tip their hard hats in respect. You're living in a time where technology is more than just a buzzword. It's a way of life. Yet, all this luxury wasn't without a cost. Maintaining a villa wasn't a mere matter of hiring a few good servants. You're looking at a small army of slaves and freedmen to handle everything from cooking to keeping those marble floors polished to a mirror shine. And that hypocaust system, it required constant attention. Wood for the furnace didn't just appear out of thin air, nor did the slaves who stoked the fires work for free. It's said that a decent-sized villa could cost up to 4,000 sesterces a year just in upkeep. To put it in perspective, a Roman legionary earned about 1,200 sesterces annually. So yeah, living in style was a full-time job in itself. Speaking of costs, let's not forget the social currency. A villa wasn't just a home, it was a stage for your political ambitions. Hosting elaborate dinner parties was practically a civic duty. The more extravagant your gatherings, the higher your social standing climbed. But this also meant keeping up with trends, which in Roman times could mean importing exotic delicacies from the far-flung corners of the empire. Flamingo tongues, anyone. And while we're busting myths, let's address the romanticized notion of Roman luxury. Sure, it sounds dreamy to have a villa with sprawling gardens and a personal bathhouse, but imagine the logistics. The staff had to be ever vigilant, and the resources needed were immense. Water for those baths. It traveled miles through aqueducts, a testament to Roman ingenuity, but still a monumental task to maintain. And if you thought Roman roads were just for legions on the march, think again. They were the arteries that kept the empire and your household supplied with goods. The downside, they were also the paths for invaders. So here you are, nestled in the lap of luxury, with the sun casting soft shadows through the columns of your peristyle garden. It's a life of comfort and prestige, but one that requires constant vigilance and resources. The villa is your stage, and today the show must go on. As the sunlight starts to slice through the Roman villa's carefully sculpted columns, it's time to shake off the dreams of grandeur and dive into the daily grind of a first-century Roman morning. You might think waking up in this opulent setting means a leisurely start, but you'd be wrong. Life in a Roman villa is like running a high-stakes game of social chess, where each move, from your breakfast to your wardrobe, must be calculated with precision. First things first, breakfast. Forget the idea of a sumptuous morning feast. The Romans kept it simple. The intaculum, or breakfast, was a no-frills affair. We're talking bread, maybe dipped in a bit of wine, and some olives or cheese if you're feeling indulgent. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a quick granola bar, functional, not fancy. Unlike our modern-day brunch culture, which celebrates leisurely eggs Benedict and bottomless mimosas, Roman breakfasts were all about efficiency. The day was ahead, and there were societal expectations to meet. Now, let's talk attire. The toga, the quintessential symbol of Roman citizenship, wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a social obligation. Draping yourself in a toga was like wearing your resume on your sleeve. It announced your status, citizenship, and even your political leanings. This wasn't just any piece of cloth, mind you. A proper toga could measure up to 20 feet in length, requiring skill to wrap without looking like you'd been caught in a linen avalanche. And if you thought laundry was a hassle now, try maintaining a pristine white toga in the dusty Roman streets. The effort involved was Herculean, but it was the price you paid to keep up appearances. And speaking of appearances, let's tackle the surprisingly sophisticated world of Roman cosmetics. The ancient Romans were no strangers to the allure of beauty products. In fact, they were pioneers of personal grooming regimes that would put some modern-day routines to shame. From kohl eyeliner to lead-based face powders, Romans pursued beauty with a fervor that often bordered on hazardous. Yes, you heard that right. Lead. While it gave the skin a pale, porcelain finish coveted by many, it also came with a side of lead poisoning. But hey, beauty is pain, right? Or in this case, beauty is a potential death sentence. It's a fine line between glamour and grim reality. The Romans were also masters of the art of olfactory persuasion. Perfumes made from exotic ingredients like frankincense and myrrh were integral to their daily routine. Smelling good wasn't just a matter of personal hygiene. It was a social requirement. Imagine navigating the crowded forums without the comforting cloak of perfume. Unthinkable. But let's not romanticize it too much. The perfumes were often a necessity to mask the less-than-pleasant aromas of daily Roman life, which included crowded streets and a lack of modern plumbing. And while we're debunking myths, let's destroy the notion that Romans were the epitome of cleanliness. Sure, they had their public baths, the thermae, which were marvels of engineering and social hubs. But daily bathing at home was another matter entirely. For many, the bathhouse was a communal event, not a private ritual. And let's not gloss over the fact that the soap of the day was made from animal fat and ashes. Effective, perhaps, but hardly the minty fresh cleanse we're accustomed to. Amidst all this, there's a rhythm to the Roman morning, an unspoken understanding of the day's demands. These rituals, from the simple breakfast to the elaborate toga draping, are more than mere routines. They're the foundations of a complex societal dance. Each day begins with a set of choices that reinforce your place in the stratified world of Roman society. So as you stand in your atrium, the marble cool beneath your feet and the day stretching ahead like a blank canvas, remember, you're not just getting dressed, you're donning the very fabric of Roman life. The villa may be your fortress of luxury, but it's also your stage. And out there, beyond the columns and the carefully tended gardens, the world awaits your performance. As you stride through the villa's corridors, the morning rituals still echoing in your mind. It's time to delve into the hidden engine room of this luxurious lifestyle, the domestic economy. Let's lift the marble tiles and peer into the gritty mechanics of how this Roman villa truly functions. Spoiler alert, it's not as glamorous as those toga-clad frescoes might suggest. First, let's talk about the backbone of villa operations, the slaves and freedmen. These were the folks who made sure your impluvium wasn't just a glorified bird bath, and that your dinners didn't consist of burnt bread and overcooked dormice. In the 1st century AD, an average Roman villa might employ anywhere from a modest handful to a veritable legion of slaves, depending on the owner's wealth. This wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was an economic necessity. Slaves did everything from cooking and cleaning to more specialized roles like tutoring your children or managing your finances. Now, I know what you're thinking. Weren't some Roman masters known for their supposed benevolence toward their slaves? Well, let's pump the brakes on that myth. While there were indeed some masters who treated their slaves better than others, the reality was often far grimmer. Many slaves were subjected to harsh conditions and brutal punishments. Consider this. A slave could be bought for about 500,000 sesterces, a bargain in comparison to the cost of maintaining free workers. Slaves were considered property, akin to livestock, and their lives were expendable. For those lucky few who gained their freedom, becoming a freedman didn't exactly mean a life of leisure. Freedmen often continued working for their former masters, now as liberty or freed individuals. Their roles could range from managing the estate's accounts to overseeing agricultural production. And while they were now free citizens, their social standing was still a notch below the elite. Think of it as moving from the mailroom to middle management. Sure, it's a step up, but you're still not sitting in the corner office. Speaking of agriculture, let's pivot to the villa's economic lifeline, food production. Roman villas were often self-sustaining entities, producing everything from olives and grapes to grains and vegetables. The villa's fields were the empire's breadbasket, quite literally. The Roman diet, heavy on grains like wheat and barley, relied on these agricultural outputs. But don't picture a tranquil, pastoral scene with smiling workers. Running a villa's agricultural operations was a complex affair, involving crop rotation, slave labor, and a keen eye on the fickle Roman market. The trade element can't be overlooked either. Roman villas were often strategically located near trade routes, maximizing their economic potential. The Roman roads were like the Amazon Prime of the ancient world, ensuring a steady flow of goods to and from your villa. However, this wasn't just about getting the freshest fish sauce from Baiae or the finest garum. It was about positioning yourself in the social pecking order. The more exotic the goods on your dinner table, the higher your social currency. But here comes the kicker: slaves, despite their integral role in the economic framework, were also the villa's most significant expense. Not only did you have to purchase them, but feeding and housing them added to the cost. The villa's economy was a delicate balancing act, with the lives of slaves and freedmen at its center. It was a system built on inequality, where the comfort of a few was supported by the toil of many. This brings us to the myth of the Roman master as a benevolent patriarch, a charming fiction often perpetuated by the Romans themselves. In truth, the power dynamics were stark and unforgiving. The paterfamilias, or male head of the household, wielded absolute authority over his family and slaves alike. His word was law, and his whims were the slave's reality. Benevolence, when it appeared, was often a strategic choice rather than a moral one. Happy slaves were more productive, after all. Yet, within this harsh system, there were moments of humanity. Some masters did educate their slaves, allowing them to become literate and skilled in various trades. This was partly pragmatic, as educated slaves could manage estates or conduct business on behalf of the master. And for the slaves themselves, education was a rare opportunity to improve their lot, albeit within the confines of servitude. The villa's domestic economy was a microcosm of the larger Roman Empire, built on conquest, trade, and a rigid social hierarchy. It was a world where luxury was bought at the cost of others' freedom, and where economic realities often clashed with the romanticized ideals of Roman culture. As you stand in the villa's meticulously maintained garden, taking in the scent of flowers and the sound of distant labor, remember that this serene facade is just that, a facade. Beneath it lies the hard truth of Roman life, where every marble column casts a shadow on the lives that uphold it. In this world, every action, from the daily running of a villa to the broader strokes of empire, was driven by an intricate dance of economy and power. The villa wasn't just a home. It was a business, a status symbol, and a micro-empire in its own right. And while the villa's beauty and grandeur might capture the imagination, it's the stories of those who lived and labored here that reveal the true complexity of Roman society. As you move through the villa, the persistent hum of activity, a constant backdrop, it's clear that maintaining this lifestyle is no small feat. Every piece of fruit, every bolt of cloth, every drop of olive oil is a testament to a system that, while deeply flawed, was remarkably efficient. And while the myth of the benevolent Roman master has its appeal, the reality is far more complicated and far more human. So as the day wears on and the villa continues its endless cycle of labor and luxury, remember that each corner holds a story, each stone a secret. The grandeur of the Roman villa is undeniable, but it's the unseen gears of its domestic economy that keep the whole machine running. And as we peel back the layers of history, we find a world that, while ancient, is not so different from our own. A world of ambition, inequality, and the perpetual quest for status and stability. As the villa thrums with the rhythm of daily life, your mind drifts to the evening's piece de resistance, the Roman banquet. Ah, the convivium. If there was ever a social circus masquerading as a dinner party, this was it. You see, in the Roman world, these banquets were less about the food and more about the spectacle. Picture it as a reality TV show, but with more togas and less chance of a wardrobe malfunction. Now, the Romans didn't just throw these gatherings on a whim. A successful banquet was a strategic play in the chess game of social and political maneuvering. The host, often a wealthy patrician, would roll out the red carpet, or rather, the mosaic floor, hoping to impress his guests with culinary delights and opulent surroundings. And let's not kid ourselves. This was less about genuine hospitality and more about flaunting one's status and influence. So, how did these soirees unfold? First, you needed the proper venue. The triclinium, or dining room, was the stage. Here, guests reclined on couches arranged in a U-shape around a central table. Reclining while eating was a luxury reserved for the upper crust, while the plebeians sat upright, if they were invited at all, that is. And don't forget, the number 3 in triclinium wasn't just for show. It indicated the 3 couches that would usually accommodate 9 guests. Talk about a cozy setup. Next came the menu, which was less of a meal plan and more of an edible armory of wealth. Exotic cuisine was the order of the day, with ingredients sourced from the farthest reaches of the empire. Flamingo tongues, stuffed dormice, and roasted peacock were just the appetizers. The more outlandish the dish, the more it said about the host's reach and riches. A banquet wasn't just a meal, it was a culinary conquest. But let's pause here to debunk the myth of the Roman banquet as a jovial, carefree affair. Sure, the wine flowed freely, and the entertainment was lively, but beneath the surface simmered a cauldron of political intrigue and power plays. The guest list was meticulously curated, and seating arrangements were a diplomatic minefield. Where you sat could signify your standing with the host. Close to the center meant favor, while the outskirts were for the social also-rans. As the evening progressed, the entertainment took center stage. Musicians, dancers, and even acrobats were paraded before the guests, each act more extravagant than the last. It was a circus of culture, and the audience was captive. Yet this wasn't just about amusement. These performances were a testament to the host's cultural capital, showcasing not only their wealth but their sophistication. And while the Romans were known for their love of theatre, the real drama often played out in whispered conversations and furtive glances. Alliances were forged, favors exchanged, and sometimes rivals were subtly undermined. The banquet was a social crucible where the heat of ambition could forge new paths or burn bridges entirely. But don't be fooled into thinking this was all champagne and roses. Well, more like Falernian wine and garlands. The politics of the banquet extended beyond the dining room. The success of such an event could bolster a host's political career, while a flop could lead to public ridicule. In a society where reputation was everything, the stakes were high. As the night drew to a close, the guests staggered homeward, perhaps a bit tipsy from the copious amounts of wine. But the effects of the evening lingered long after the last lamp was extinguished. For the host, it was a calculated gamble, an investment in future influence. For the guests, it was a chance to bask in reflected glory or plot their next move. In the end, the Roman banquet was more than just a social gathering. It was a microcosm of Roman society itself, a world of opulence and ambition where every gesture was loaded with meaning. It was a dance of power, performed to the tune of clinking goblets and murmured conversations. So, as you prepare for your own evening of revelry, remember that behind the lavish displays and sumptuous feasts lies a world driven by power and politics. The villa may be a haven of luxury, but its walls echo with the ambitions and machinations of those who dwell within. The Roman banquet, with all its glamour and guile, was a testament to human nature, a reflection of our eternal quest for status and influence, wrapped in the gilded trappings of ancient Rome. As the echoes of the Roman banquet's reverie fade into the silence of the villa's grand halls, your thoughts drift to a quieter, yet equally significant facet of life in this ancient world, the spiritual and philosophical beliefs that underpin Roman society. While the clamor of politics and the splendor of banquets might dominate the spotlight, it's the personal rituals and philosophical musings that form the bedrock of Roman identity. Now, let's get one thing straight. The idea of a monolithic Roman religion is about as accurate as thinking all Romans wore togas 24/7. In reality, Roman spirituality was as diverse as the empire itself, a veritable buffet of beliefs and practices. You had your household gods, the Lares and Penates, who were believed to watch over the family and hearth. These deities were as much a part of daily life as your morning bread and wine. Little altars dedicated to them adorn the home, where offerings were made to keep them appeased. Think of them as the spiritual equivalent of your Wi-Fi router, ever present, often overlooked, but essential for keeping everything running smoothly. Public ceremonies, on the other hand, were grander affairs, rife with pomp and circumstance. The Romans loved a good procession, complete with sacrifices and elaborate rituals. These were not just religious events, but a chance to reinforce social hierarchies and political power. The state religion was a public show, where emperors were often deified, and the gods were invoked to legitimize authority. It's like a blockbuster film with a cast of thousands, but the script is written by the victors. And then there's the philosophical side of things. While the gods were worshipped with fervor, philosophy offered a different kind of solace. Enter the Stoics and Epicureans, the intellectual rock stars of the Roman world. Stoicism, with its emphasis on virtue and endurance, was a favorite among the Roman elite. It preached the idea of accepting one's fate with equanimity and focusing on what one could control. Marcus Aurelius himself was a Stoic philosopher, penning his meditations amidst the chaos of ruling an empire. It's the ancient equivalent of mindfulness apps, offering calm in a stormy world. Epicureanism, on the other hand, was all about the pursuit of pleasure, though not the bacchanalian kind. Epicurus advocated for a simple life, free from pain and fear. His idea of pleasure was more about peace of mind than indulgent excess. Picture a quiet afternoon in the garden, a good book in hand, and perhaps a glass of wine. Moderation was key. It was a philosophy that appealed to those seeking respite from the relentless pace of Roman life. But here's where we bust another myth. These philosophies weren't just reserved for the Roman elite. They trickled down through society, influencing everyone from senators to slaves. The appeal of Stoicism and Epicureanism lay in their universal relevance, offering guidance on how to lead a good life regardless of one's social standing. In a world rife with uncertainty, these philosophies provided a roadmap for navigating the vicissitudes of fortune. As the night deepens and the villa settles into a hushed stillness, you're reminded that beneath the grandeur and spectacle of Roman life lies a complex tapestry of beliefs and ideas. It's a world where gods and philosophers coexist, shaping the lives and destinies of those who call the empire home. And while the allure of Roman opulence is undeniable, it's the spiritual and philosophical undercurrents that lend depth to the Roman experience. So, as you stand on the threshold of your atrium, the flickering lamps casting shadows on the marble floors, you realize that the legacy of Rome is not just in its monuments or military conquests. It's in the ideas and beliefs that have endured through centuries, influencing generations long after the last Roman villa crumbled into ruins. The Romans, with all their contradictions and complexities, offer a mirror to our own world, a reminder that beneath the facade of power and privilege lies the enduring human quest for meaning and understanding. In the end, the Roman villa is more than a symbol of luxury. It's a testament to the intricate web of human ambition, faith, and philosophy. It's a world where the mundane and the magnificent coexist, where the pursuit of status is balanced by the search for inner peace. And as the first light of dawn begins to creep over the horizon, you find yourself pondering the eternal dance of power and belief that defines not just the Romans, but all of humanity. The villa may be silent now, but its stories echo through time, whispering of a world both distant and familiar, a world that continues to captivate and inspire. Athens wasn't always the glamorous hub of ancient civilization we like to picture, with its marble temples and toga-clad philosophers debating under the sun. Nope, before it boomed into the Golden Age, Athens was just another Greek city-state trying to make a name for itself after giving the Persians a proverbial boot out the door. We're talking about the aftermath of the Persian Wars, that grand showdown where David really did beat Goliath. Athens, armed with their slick navy and hoplite warriors, managed not just to survive, but to thrive in this chaotic era. And that's where our story begins. Now, how did Athens go from scrappy underdog to colossal cultural titan? Well, like any decent makeover story, it started with a little economic boost and some political innovation. Think of it as the ancient Greek version of hitting the lottery and then deciding to run for mayor. After the Persian Wars around 479 BCE, Athens found itself with a shiny new fleet and a bunch of allies in the Delian League, which was essentially a let's all pitch in to keep the Persians away club. This league wasn't just about defeating Persian invaders, it was also a cash cow. Allies paid tribute, and Athens took the lion's share, turning the city into a buzzing economic powerhouse. With the economic engine running at full throttle, Athens had the resources to experiment with a radical idea: democracy. But before you get too starry-eyed about the birthplace of freedom and equality, let's pump the brakes and consider the fine print. Athenian democracy wasn't about universal suffrage or everyone getting a say. This was a club with a strict dress code. You had to be a male citizen over the age of 18 and not a slave. So about 10–20% of the population had voting rights. Women, slaves, and foreigners. Sorry, folks, no ballot for you. The Athenian Assembly, or Ecclesia, if you want to impress at your next trivia night, was where these qualified citizens met regularly, about 40 times a year, to make decisions on everything from war to public projects. It was like the ultimate town hall meeting, and every male citizen could voice his opinion. Sounds chaotic, right? It was. But that chaos was the beauty of democracy in Athens. It encouraged public debate, fostered civic participation, and sometimes led to decisions that were, well, less than brilliant. But at least they tried, and that's what mattered. Now, let's talk about one of the quirkiest aspects of Athenian democracy: ostracism. Ostracism wasn't just a fancy word for giving someone the cold shoulder. It was a political tool, a way to exile someone for 10 years without any loss of property or status, kind of like a state-mandated sabbatical. The idea was to protect the city from potential tyrants or anyone getting a bit too big for their britches. But here's the kicker: the person didn't have to have committed a crime. If 6,000 citizens wrote your name on pottery shards called ostraka, off you went. It was democracy at its most direct, and let's be honest, a bit petty. And who could forget the infamous ostracism of Themistocles? This was the guy who played a huge role in the victory over Persia at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE. But a few political missteps later, and the Athenians decided to give him the boot in 471 BCE. Talk about gratitude. Despite the occasional public banishment, Athenian democracy was groundbreaking for its time. It wasn't perfect, and it definitely wasn't fair by today's standards, but it was a start, a messy, loud, and passionate start, and it set the stage for the cultural explosion that was to come. With democracy in place, Athens became a breeding ground for creativity and innovation. Citizens felt empowered to express their ideas, and the city attracted thinkers, artists, and architects who would shape the Western world for centuries. So there you have it. In the wake of the Persian Wars, Athens took its newfound wealth and political experimentation and ran with it, laying the groundwork for what we now call the Golden Age. It was a time of great change, with the Athenians figuring out this whole democracy thing through trial and error, and a bit of exile here and there. And as we'll see, this was just the beginning of a cultural revolution that would leave the world forever changed. Stay tuned, because things are about to get even more interesting. So as Athens rolled out the red carpet for what would become its golden age, the city was practically buzzing with the creative energy of a Renaissance fair, minus the turkey legs and jousting, of course. With a political system that encouraged debate and the occasional public shaming, it's no wonder that Athens became a magnet for the most brilliant minds of the time. And just like today, where every influencer has a podcast or a YouTube channel, back then, if you had a big idea, you were in Athens. It was the ancient world's version of a TED Talk, minus the tech glitches. Let's start with one of the big names, a guy who loved asking questions more than a toddler on a road trip: Socrates. This dude was the ultimate philosopher king without the crown, prowling the agora like a wisdom-seeking missile. He didn't write a single word himself, so everything we know about him comes from his student Plato, who was basically Socrates' PR guy. What made Socrates tick? He was all about questioning everything, seriously everything. It's like he was the original skeptic, the kind of guy who'd ask, why? Even after you answered his first, why? And while today we might find that endearing, back then, it was a bit like poking a bear. The Athenians eventually got tired of his relentless questioning, which is why they sentenced him to death in 399 BCE, charging him with corrupting the youth and impiety. Harsh, right, but before you cancel Athens for this little faux pas, remember it was a society still figuring out how to handle disruptive innovators. Now, what's a cultural revolution without a little drama? Enter Sophocles, the man behind the curtain of ancient Greek theatre. He was like the Spielberg of his day, penning over 120 plays, though only 7 have survived to keep his legacy alive. Sophocles was a master at weaving human emotion with divine intervention, turning the simple act of going to the theatre into a full-blown emotional roller coaster. His most famous work, Oedipus Rex, is a real knee-slapper about a guy who kills his dad and marries his mom. Sophocles had the Midas touch when it came to tragedy, but unlike Midas, he didn't turn everything to gold. He turned it into existential dread. And just like today's critics who argue over the merits of a new Netflix series, not everyone in Athens was a fan of these heavy-hitting dramas. Some people just wanted a break from all the catharsis, you know. But theatre wasn't just for gloom and doom. Comedy also had its day in the sun, with playwrights like Aristophanes, who had a knack for satire sharper than a Spartan spear. His plays were the ancient version of a roast, targeting everyone from politicians to philosophers, and even the gods themselves. In Lysistrata, for instance, he imagined a scenario where women go on a sex strike to force men to end a war. Talk about flipping the script. Aristophanes didn't pull any punches, and his plays often danced on the line of what was socially acceptable, poking fun at the very society that adored him. It's a comforting thought, really, that even in the height of Athens' cultural sophistication, people still loved a good laugh at the expense of authority. And then there was art, which saw an unprecedented flourish during this period. With all that sweet Delian League cash jingling in their pockets, Athenians embarked on a building spree that would make today's urban developers green with envy. The Parthenon, the crown jewel of Athenian architecture, was constructed between 447 and 432 BCE. This wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of Athenian pride and ingenuity. Phidias, the maestro behind the Parthenon sculptures, turned marble into masterpieces, crafting works that were less about ornately detailed perfection and more about capturing the divine essence of humanity. Sure, it was all a bit over the top, but the Athenians weren't exactly known for their subtlety. Now, let's not forget the unsung heroes of this cultural renaissance, the mathematicians and scientists who laid the groundwork for Western thought. Take Pythagoras, whose theorem would become the bane of high school students everywhere. Though he wasn't an Athenian, his ideas permeated the intellectual climate like a viral tweet. And Hippocrates, the father of medicine, was busy laying down the foundations of medical ethics and practice. His famous oath, which doctors still reference today, was less about do no harm and more about don't be reckless, which, let's be honest, is advice we could all use. But here's the kicker. Despite all this grandeur, not every Athenian was a fan of these cultural pursuits. Just like today, where some people can't stand modern art or prefer reality TV to Shakespeare, there were those who thought all this highbrow stuff was a bit much. Some Athenians were like, can't we just have a nice amphora of wine and not worry about whether Oedipus really did it with his mom? The cultural explosion was real, but so was the cultural fatigue. So there you have it, a peek into the vibrant world of Athens during its golden age. It was a time when philosophy, drama, and art didn't just coexist. They thrived, intertwined in a dance that would shape Western culture for millennia. But don't worry, we're not done yet. There's still more to uncover as we unravel the complexities of this ancient powerhouse. So stay tuned, because the story of Athens is far from over. As Athens continued to dazzle the ancient world with its cultural fireworks, it was also busy pulling off the architectural equivalent of a mic drop. Enter the Parthenon, the piece de resistance of Athenian ambition, perched atop the Acropolis like a crown jewel that could blind you with its brilliance, or at least the sun reflecting off all that marble. But let's cut through the aesthetic ore and dig into the nitty-gritty. What did it take to erect such a monument, and why did they bother? The Parthenon wasn't just a temple. It was a bold billboard of Athenian power and sophistication. Built between 447 and 432 BCE, under the watchful eye of the statesman Pericles, this temple to Athene was a massive undertaking. It was like the ancient version of launching an iPhone, a carefully orchestrated spectacle meant to showcase Athenian prowess. And boy, did it cost a pretty drachma. The construction required an estimated 469 silver talents, which, in today's money, would be like shelling out several $1 million. To put that in perspective, that's enough cash to buy a small army of Spartan warriors or throw the mother of all toga parties. Now, about the logistics. The Parthenon was constructed using roughly 13,400 stones, each weighing between 2 and 4 tons. The Greeks sourced their marble from Mount Pentelicus, about 16 kilometers, 10 miles away. Imagine trying to transport these behemoths without the help of modern machinery. They relied on sheer manpower and ingenuity, a bit like trying to move your living room couch up a 5-story walk-up, but with the added challenge of not having invented the wheelbarrow yet. Then there's the workforce behind this architectural wonder. It wasn't just skilled artisans and architects like Ictinos and Callicrates who were involved. There were also countless laborers, including slaves, whose toil and sweat were the unsung notes in this symphony of stone. This brings us to the age-old question. Was all this marble really necessary, or was it just an ancient version of keeping up with the Joneses? In a word, yes. The Parthenon was as much about showing off as it was about piety. It was a visual flex, a colossal reminder that Athens wasn't just a city-state. It was the city-state. This was a time when civic pride and divine worship were two sides of the same drachma. The Parthenon housed the chryselephantine statue of Athene Parthenos, crafted by the legendary sculptor Phidias. Standing at about 12 meters, 39 feet, tall, and adorned with gold and ivory, this statue was a literal treasure chest of wealth, with its gold parts being removable in case of financial emergency. Talk about a flexible savings account. But let's not romanticize the process too much. The building of the Parthenon also involved some political maneuvering. Pericles, the mastermind behind the plan, used the project to strengthen his political position. By employing Athenians on this grand scale, he kept the populace busy and happy, reducing the likelihood of dissent. It was a clever move, blending public works with political strategy, like a mayor who builds a shiny new park while running for re-election. Yet not everyone was thrilled. Critics argued that the funds used were meant for the defense of the Delian League, not for constructing temples. It was like taking the Neighborhood Watch Fund and using it to build a lavish fountain in your front yard. Pericles' critics were quick to point out the misuse of what was essentially taxpayer money. But let's face it, politics hasn't changed much in a couple of 1,000 years. Public projects often come with a side of controversy. And what about the craftsmanship itself? The Parthenon wasn't just a big box of rocks. It was a masterpiece of optical illusions. The architects employed a technique called entasis, giving columns a slight bulge to counteract the visual distortion that made straight lines appear curved from a distance. Even the floor wasn't flat. It had a subtle upward curve to make the structure look straight to the eye. It's like the ancient Greeks had a PhD in tricking your brain. These were not mere builders. They were optical wizards, bending perceptions to create a sense of divine perfection. So why go to all this trouble? Why the marble, the money, and the manpower? In the end, the Parthenon was more than just a temple. It was a statement. It declared Athens as a beacon of culture and power, a city at the pinnacle of human achievement. It was the ancient version of a blockbuster film, a spectacle meant to awe and inspire. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a little spectacle? But remember, this was just one piece of the puzzle. Athens wasn't content with just one grand monument. The Golden Age was a time when the city seemed to be in a constant state of construction, each new building more ambitious than the last. Other structures on the Acropolis, like the Erechthion with its famous caryatids, added to the architectural tapestry. Each project was a testament to the Athenians' drive to outdo themselves, to create something that would stand the test of time, and in many ways they succeeded. As we marvel at the Parthenon today, it's easy to forget the pragmatic concerns that drove its creation. It was as much about politics and economics as it was about art and religion. The Parthenon was built in a world where city-states vied for prestige, where monuments were as much about outshining rivals as they were about pleasing the gods. And while we may never fully understand the mindset of those ancient builders, we can still stand in awe of their achievements, appreciating both the beauty and the brains behind the brawn. So there you have it, a peek behind the marble curtain of one of history's greatest architectural feats. But Athens' story doesn't end here. The city continued to evolve, its fortunes rising and falling with the tides of history. As we move forward, we'll explore how these grand structures and the society that built them navigated the challenges of their time. There's plenty more intrigue, innovation, and drama to uncover as we continue our journey through the Golden Age of Athens. As we delve deeper into the glories of Athens, it's time to lift the veil on its less glamorous realities, the gritty underbelly that was conveniently glossed over in those grand narratives of democracy and cultural triumph. While Athens was busy building monuments and birthing democracy, there was a whole layer of society that wasn't included in this shiny new world order. Spoiler alert, not everyone got an invitation to the Democratic Party. Let's start with slavery, an institution as old as civilization itself, and in Athens, a crucial cog in the societal machine. While the Athenians were scribbling down new philosophies and dabbling in democracy, they were also propping up their bustling economy on the backs of slaves. Estimates suggest that slaves made up about a third of the population, around 60,000 to 80,000 souls. Picture this. In a city renowned for its philosophical musings on freedom and equality, a significant chunk of the population was living in the exact opposite conditions. Ironic, right? Slaves in Athens, like elsewhere in the ancient world, weren't just laborers. They were everything from domestic servants to skilled artisans. They mined the silver that funded the Athenian fleet, farmed the land that fed the city, and even served as clerks managing the day-to-day operations of the city-state. It's like having your iPhone and complaining about it while it's the very thing keeping your digital life afloat. The Athenians might have celebrated their democracy, but let's be honest, it was a democracy built on inequality. And what about women? If you thought they were sitting back with a glass of Retsina, enjoying the democratic process, think again. Athenian women were more likely to be found managing the household than voting in the assembly. In our modern terms, their rights were practically non-existent. Legally, they were under the guardianship of a male relative, father, husband, or even a son. They couldn't own property independently, and their roles were largely domestic. If you were a woman in Athens, your life revolved around the oikos, or household, where your chief duties included weaving, managing slaves, and producing heirs. It was less sisterhood of the travelling pants, and more sisterhood of the stationary loom. But let's not paint all women with the same brush. There were exceptions, like Aspasia of Miletus, who was known for her intellectual prowess and influence over Pericles himself. Aspasia was no typical Athenian woman. She was a foreigner, possibly a courtesan, who moved in intellectual circles and was known for her wit and wisdom. She was the heady Lamar of her time, captivating, intelligent, and ahead of her era. Yet her life was a rare exception, not the rule. Class divisions, too, played a starring role in this socio-political drama. While the rich and powerful enjoyed the fruits of their labor, or rather, the labor of others, the lower classes, including small farmers and artisans, lived a much more precarious existence. These were the folks who manned the oars in the Athenian triremes and filled the ranks of the hoplite army. They might have had a say in the assembly, but let's not kid ourselves. Their influence was limited by their economic realities. The political system of Athens, while revolutionary, was also a bit of a smoke and mirrors act. Sure, the assembly was open to all male citizens, but who really wielded the power? The elite, of course. It was the wealthier citizens who had the means to participate fully in the political system. They could afford to spend days in the assembly or serve on the council of 500 without worrying about the farm back home. Politics was a part-time hobby for the affluent. For everyone else, it was a luxury they couldn't afford. It's like trying to play Monopoly when you're perpetually stuck on go. And then there's the issue of the infamous ostracism. While on paper it was a democratic process, in reality it was often manipulated by the powerful to remove political rivals. Think of it as an ancient political reshuffle with a side of pottery shards. It was less about protecting the city from tyrants and more about political maneuvering. The idea that it was a pure expression of democracy is as enticing as it is misleading. Despite these stark realities, it's important to acknowledge the allure of Athenian democracy. The idea that ordinary citizens, at least a privileged segment of them, could have a say in the governance of their city was groundbreaking. It laid the foundation for future democratic systems, even if it was a rocky start. But it's crucial to see it for what it was. A system far from the idealistic notions often romanticized in modern retellings. As we continue to peel back the layers of Athens' golden age, it's clear that the city was a study in contrasts, a beacon of cultural and intellectual achievement built on a foundation of social inequality and exclusion. It was a time when the human spirit soared to new heights of creativity and thought, yet was also bound by age-old prejudices and hierarchies. The story of Athens is not just one of glory, but also of the grit and grime that made such glory possible. As we prepare to dive further into this ancient world, remember, history is never as simple as it seems, and the truth is often found in the shadows cast by those brilliant marble monuments. Stay tuned for more revelations as we continue our journey through the complexities of Athenian society. As we prepare to dive further into this ancient world, remember, history is never as simple as it seems, and the truth is often found in the shadows cast by those brilliant marble monuments. Speaking of shadows, let's talk about the dark cloud that rolled over Athens, the Peloponnesian War. You might think of it as the ancient Greek version of a reality TV feud, but with more spears and fewer commercial breaks. This conflict, lasting from 431 to 404 BCE, was the ultimate throwdown between Athens and Sparta, and it wasn't just a regional tiff. This war was a heavyweight bout, with the entire Greek world caught in the middle. Now let's set the scene. Picture Athens, riding high on the success of its golden age, looking down at Sparta with the kind of disdain usually reserved for a rival football team. Sparta, the militaristic powerhouse with a society built more like a boot camp than a city-state, was not amused by Athens' swagger. It didn't help that Athens, under the guidance of Pericles, was expanding its influence via the Delian League, which increasingly looked like an Athenian empire in all but name. Sparta, backed by the Peloponnesian League, saw this as a threat. Cue dramatic music and the clashing of shields, the spark that ignited this powder keg. The city-state of Corinth, a key Spartan ally, was getting twitchy over Athens' expanding influence, especially in the strategically important area of the Corinthian Gulf. Corinth poked Sparta, and Sparta, always ready for a tussle, obliged. Thus began a conflict that would stretch over nearly 3 decades, drawing in allies and enemies like a soap opera on steroids. The war can be broken down into 3 acts, each with its own plot twists and cliffhangers. The Archidamian War, the first phase, kicked off with Sparta invading Athenian territory, laying waste to the countryside like a particularly aggressive neighborhood watch. Athens, under Pericles, countered with a naval strategy, relying on its superior fleet to harass Spartan allies and keep the grain ships flowing. But here's the kicker. In 430 BCE, a plague hit Athens, killing about a third of the population, including Pericles himself, in 429 BCE. It was like a cosmic slap in the face, reminding Athens that not even the gods were on their side. The middle act, the Peace of Nisches, was less of a peace and more of an awkward ceasefire, like when two frenemies pause their bickering just long enough to catch their breath. This so-called peace, signed in 421 BCE, was supposed to last 50 years, but barely made it 6. Why? Because neither side was really committed to peace, and both kept poking each other with diplomatic sticks. Athens, in particular, couldn't resist meddling in Sicilian affairs, leading to the ill-fated Sicilian expedition. Imagine betting your life savings on a hunch. Athens gambled its entire fleet on this campaign in 415 BCE, only to see it obliterated by 413 BCE. It was a military disaster of epic proportions, akin to sending your best players into extra time only to watch them score own goals. Finally, the war's last act, the Ionian or Decelean War, saw Sparta, now backed by Persian gold, because why not throw a wild card into the mix? Build its own navy. Athens, reeling from its Sicilian blunder, was like a boxer on the ropes. Despite a few naval victories, Athens' resources were stretched thinner than a toga at a banquet. By 405 BCE, the Spartan general Lysander delivered the knockout punch at the Battle of Aegospotami, capturing the Athenian fleet and effectively cutting off the city's lifeline. Athens surrendered in 404 BCE, its walls torn down to the sound of Spartan flutes, a symbolic act of humiliation. So, what led to Athens' downfall? It wasn't just military blunders and bad luck. It was a cocktail of hubris, overextension, and the harsh realities of geopolitics. Athens, for all its cultural and intellectual brilliance, was brought down by the same forces that have toppled empires throughout history. The inability to balance ambition with pragmatism. And what about the lessons for us modern folk? For one, history reminds us that even the mightiest fall when they forget the fundamentals, like the importance of allies, the risks of overreach, and the perils of internal discord. Athens' democracy, celebrated for its inclusivity, albeit limited, was also its Achilles' heel. Political infighting, the sway of demagogues, and the erosion of civic unity all played a part. It's a sobering thought for any modern democracy that stability requires more than grand ideals. It demands constant vigilance and a willingness to adapt. But let's not write off Athens just yet. Its legacy, though tarnished by war, remains a beacon. The cultural and intellectual achievements of its golden age continue to inspire. From philosophy to drama, architecture to politics, Athens laid the groundwork for Western civilization. And if there's one thing we can learn from its rise and fall, it's that true greatness isn't just about towering achievements. It's about resilience, adaptation, and the ability to learn from history's harsh lessons. As we close this chapter on Athens, let's carry forward both its triumphs and its failures. Because in the end, the story of Athens is not just about a city that once was. It's about the enduring spirit of human endeavor, the eternal dance between progress and hubris, and the timeless quest for a better world. So the next time you find yourself pondering the past, remember, history is not just a series of dates and events, but a mirror reflecting the complexities of the human experience. And that, dear friends, is why we keep looking back, to understand, to learn, and hopefully to do better. To the folks in medieval England, hunting was much more than just a way to pass the time on a lazy Sunday afternoon. It was like the medieval version of Instagram. If you had a successful hunt, you had to flaunt it. Picture the lords and ladies decked out in their finest, strutting through the forest with a retinue of servants, dogs, and probably a minstrel or two for good measure. But hunting wasn't just about the thrill of the chase or the size of your antlered trophy. Nope, it was a bona fide status symbol, a rite of passage for the elite whose social standing hovered somewhere between "I own half of England" and "I really want to own all of England." Now, we're not talking about your average Joe pitching in to catch dinner. Hunting during these times was wrapped up in a web of social hierarchy so tight you'd need a medieval hacksaw to cut through it. And let's be honest, a hacksaw is about as subtle as a castle siege. For the nobles, hunting was a demonstration of power and privilege. It was an exclusive club, and just like any exclusive club, there was a long list of rules and regulations. Enter the infamous forest laws. These laws were the ultimate gatekeepers, dictating who could hunt what, where, and when. They were basically the medieval version of no trespassing signs, only with a bit more bite. So, who got to play the hunting game? Well, if you were a peasant, you were more likely to find yourself being chased off the land by the local lord's men than actually catching anything. But if you held a title, had a bit of land, and maybe a castle or two, then the forest was your oyster or, well, your deer. The forest laws were the brainchild of William the Conqueror, a man who clearly thought England needed a little more structure, or maybe just more outdoor hobbies. These laws were as specific as they were draconian. For instance, if you were caught poaching, you wouldn't just get a slap on the wrist. Nope, in the good old days of medieval justice, you might find yourself missing a hand, an eye, or even your life. Talk about getting a little carried away with enforcing property rights. The harsh penalties were designed to deter the common folk from turning the king's deer into venison stew, but they also served as a stark reminder of who really held the power. Of course, the forest laws weren't just about keeping peasants in check. They were also a way for the crown to cash in on fines and penalties. If you were caught poaching and managed to keep your body parts intact, you'd still be hit with a hefty fine. And these fines weren't pocket change. They could run as high as a year's wages for a peasant. So, what was the average John Doe to do if he fancied a bit of venison? Well, he could take his chances and hope for a sympathetic sheriff, or more realistically, just stick to the rabbits and hope nobody noticed. The romanticized view of the noble hunter, riding through the forest with his faithful hounds, is all well and good. But it's important to remember that this was a world where social status dictated your every move. The elite used hunting as a way to reinforce their power and control, while the average person saw it as a potential death sentence. The forest laws were a reminder that, in medieval England, the divide between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the English Channel. So, while the image of a lord proudly displaying his latest catch might stir the imagination, the reality was far less glamorous. Behind the pomp and circumstance lay a brutal system of control, where nature's bounty was just another tool of the ruling class. And as for those caught on the wrong side of the forest laws, well, let's just say that the medieval justice system had a way of ensuring that you wouldn't forget your place in the social order. But let's shift gears and dive into the financial abyss that was the medieval hunting estate. It wasn't just about riding out with your merry band of followers and catching dinner. Oh no, running a hunting estate was about as cheap as a royal coronation and almost as complicated. First off, you needed land, a lot of it. A proper hunting estate could stretch over thousands of acres, which might sound appealing until you realize you have to manage it. Imagine the logistics of hosting a never-ending outdoor party where the guests are deer and boar, and they're not exactly RSVPing. Maintaining these estates required a small army of gamekeepers, foresters, and beaters. These folks weren't volunteers. They needed wages, housing, and sometimes even bonuses to keep them loyal and not, say, helping themselves to a haunch of venison. The price tag for staffing alone was enough to make even the most enthusiastic lord consider taking up knitting instead. While we're on the topic of expenses, let's talk gear. You couldn't just grab any old bow or sword for a day's hunt. No. Your equipment needed to be as fashionable as it was functional. A nobleman might spend the modern equivalent of a small car on a single crossbow. And don't get me started on the clothing. Finely woven fabrics, often imported, were the order of the day. It was like showing up to the forest in a designer suit, because heaven forbid the deer didn't recognize your status before being skewered. Now, let's paint a picture of disparity by stepping into the worn-out shoes of your average medieval peasant. While the nobles were busy outspending each other on estate upkeep, the peasant was figuring out how to feed a family on less money than it took to polish a noble's hunting boots. The average peasant was lucky to earn a few pennies a day, and with a year's wages often being less than the cost of a single hunting dog, it's clear that hunting was less about survival and more about flaunting wealth. Speaking of dogs, these canines weren't your run-of-the-mill mutts either. Nobles imported exotic breeds from as far away as Spain and the Middle East, sometimes spending fortunes just for the bragging rights. Imagine explaining that expense to your accountant. Yes, I needed the Egyptian greyhound because my English one wasn't making the right impression on the local wildlife. But the piece de resistance in this display of wealth and extravagance was undoubtedly the hunting feast. After a successful hunt, the nobility would throw banquets that could make a modern-day buffet look like a light snack. These feasts were a chance to show off the day's catch, and menus often included venison, boar, and even swan if they were feeling particularly audacious. And let's not ignore the gallons of wine and ale that would flow as freely as the egos filling the room. The sheer opulence of these feasts was staggering, with some records suggesting that a single event could cost what a peasant might earn in several years. The whole affair was less about sustenance and more about spectacle. The irony, of course, was that while the noble class dined on the finest, the very peasants who maintained their estates might have been lucky to get a bowl of gruel. And as if the local fauna wasn't enough, there's evidence that some nobles went to the extreme by importing exotic animals just to show off their hunting prowess. Think lions and leopards roaming the English forests, not exactly native species. But for some lords, having a lion in your backyard was the medieval equivalent of owning a Lamborghini. It was less about practicality and more about making your neighbors question their life choices. In the grand scheme of medieval life, hunting was a microcosm of the broader societal divides. It was a game, both literally and figuratively, played by the elite to reinforce their dominance, their wealth, and their separation from the common folk. The disparity was as wide as the hunting grounds themselves, with peasants left to marvel at the spectacle, perhaps even dreaming of a life where their worth wasn't measured by their poverty. This lavish display of wealth and power was the ultimate flex, where the stakes were as high as the forest laws were unforgiving. And in this world of grandeur and excess, the line between hunter and hunted was often more about one's title than one's skill with a bow. While medieval nobles were busy playing their high-stakes game of who can out-hunt whom, someone had to handle the nitty-gritty of organizing these elaborate hunting expeditions. Contrary to today's world, where a quick GPS search can get you anywhere from Starbucks to Siberia, medieval hunting logistics relied on good old-fashioned yelling and horn blowing. Imagine it, a cacophony of shouts echoing through the forest, accompanied by the blare of horns, all orchestrated to keep the hunting party from turning into a medieval version of a lost weekend. Let's break down the logistics. First, you needed a hunting party, and this wasn't just a casual gathering of friends. It was more like assembling a medieval Avengers team, except instead of superheroes, you had a mix of nobles, skilled huntsmen, and a pack of dogs that probably had better pedigrees than half the aristocracy. These huntsmen were the real MVPs, the unsung heroes who actually knew which end of the spear to hold. They were the ones who tracked the game, organized the beaters to flush out animals, and generally made sure the noble in charge didn't accidentally spear himself instead of the deer. Now, the role of the dogs cannot be overstated. If you thought your neighborhood dog park was intense, picture a forest teeming with hounds trained for everything from scenting to chasing down prey. These canine companions were as diverse as the noble's wardrobe, with breeds like greyhounds and mastiffs taking center stage. They were the four-legged GPS systems of the time, leading the pack on the scent of deer or boar. And if you think your dog's kibble is expensive, medieval hounds likely dined on better fare than most of the local peasantry. Speaking of the peasantry, let's not forget the beaters, those unfortunate souls whose job was to drive the game towards the hunting party, all while trying not to become part of the hunt themselves. Armed with sticks and voices, they'd create a ruckus loud enough to rouse any self-respecting stag from its slumber. and for their trouble they were rewarded with, well, not much. Maybe a bit of leftover stew if they were lucky, but definitely no invites to the post-hunt feast. The whole event was less about the thrill of the chase, and more of an exercise in elaborate social choreography. Each hunt was an opportunity for the nobles to showcase their wealth, skill, and connections. The forest turned into a stage where alliances were forged, political deals were whispered, and social hierarchies were reinforced with every successful kill. It was the medieval version of a corporate retreat, minus the PowerPoint presentations, but with just as much backroom politicking. But here's the kicker. While the nobles were busy plotting and posturing, nature itself was an unpredictable co-star. One wrong move, and your hunting party could end up hopelessly lost, or, worse, outwitted by a particularly cunning boar. It's no wonder they relied on those horns and shouts. It was the only way to keep everyone on track and avoid turning the whole affair into a tragic comedy. And then there were the social dynamics. Hunting was the Tinder of the Middle Ages, a chance for the aristocracy to meet, greet, and if things went well, arrange a strategic marriage or two. It was less about romance and more about land, title, and influence. Think of it as speed dating with a side of venison. The hunting field was a place where alliances were cemented, rivalries simmered, and sometimes, if you were lucky, genuine friendships blossomed. This blend of sport, strategy, and socializing made hunting a cornerstone of medieval life for the elite. It was as much about the people as it was about the prey. And while the nobles were busy chasing deer, they were also chasing power, prestige, and perhaps a little bit of personal glory. The hunt was a reflection of the medieval world itself, a place where status was everything, and every action was a move in a larger game of chess. In this high-stakes world, every hunt was a carefully orchestrated event where nothing was left to chance. From the precise timing of the hunt to the intricate social maneuvering, it was all part of a grand tapestry that defined medieval aristocratic life. So while the image of a noble galloping through the woods with his hounds might seem like a romantic echo of a bygone era, it was in fact a complex dance of logistics, politics, and power plays, all set against the backdrop of England's sprawling forests. And as the huntsmen blew their horns and the dogs barked their way through the underbrush, one thing was clear. In the medieval Game of Thrones, the hunt was more than just a pastime. It was a battleground where the true winners weren't always the ones who brought home the biggest stag. While the nobles were busy pretending they were medieval James Bonds in the forest, the reality of hunting was a far cry from the glossy tales spun in courtly ballads. The romanticized image of the noble hunter, elegantly poised on horseback, was more like a medieval blooper reel if you took a closer look. Hunting in medieval England wasn't just a walk in the park. It was an extreme sport with a side of, oops, I didn't see that tree. Let's start with the weather, the eternal wild card in the game of medieval hunting. Picture it. A soggy English morning where the rain comes down harder than the king's taxes. Nobles weren't exactly decked out in Gore-Tex. Their attire was more about style than substance, which meant that a sudden downpour could transform a stately hunting party into a group of very wet, very cold aristocrats. Imagine the chafing in all that soaked velvet and brocade. Suddenly, the idea of staying home by the fire doesn't seem so bad. But hey, let's say you got lucky and the sun was shining. Great, right? Well, except for the swarms of insects just waiting to make a meal out of you. And let's not forget the mud, an ever-present reality that had nobles slipping and sliding like they were trying out for medieval ice dancing. A misstep could send you tumbling into a ditch, and if you were really unlucky, you'd find yourself face to face with a rather surprised hedgehog. Now, if the weather didn't get you, the landscape might. England's forests were dense, tangled affairs that seemed to delight in ensnaring the unwary. One wrong turn, and you'd be hopelessly lost, your cries for help swallowed by the trees. Forget Google Maps. A medieval hunter had to rely on memory and maybe a bit of divine intervention to find their way back. Then there was the wildlife itself, which, contrary to popular depictions, wasn't exactly lining up to be caught. Wild boars, for example, were the medieval equivalent of a tank on legs. With tusks sharp enough to make a knight reconsider his life choices, these beasts were the real deal. Every now and then, a hunting party would discover just how dangerous a cornered boar could be, usually when it was charging at them with the speed of a medieval freight train. In fact, boar hunting was so hazardous that it wasn't uncommon for hunts to end with a few more injuries than they started. A noble might return with a gash from a tusk, or worse, a broken limb from being unceremoniously thrown by a panicked horse. And while we're on the topic of injuries, falling from a horse was practically a rite of passage. 1 minute you're a lord of the manor, and the next you're eating dirt while your steed gallops off into the sunset. But the dangers weren't limited to the four-legged variety. Human error played a starring role in many a hunting mishap. A misfired arrow could turn a hunting buddy into an accidental pincushion. In 1100, King William II, known as Rufus, famously met his end during a hunt felled by an arrow to the chest. Whether it was an accident or a medieval whodunit remains a matter of debate, but it certainly put a damper on the day's festivities. So why did they do it? Why risk life and limb for the thrill of the chase? Part of it, of course, was the allure of danger, a chance to prove one's mettle and earn a few bragging rights at the next feast. But more than that, hunting was a way to connect with a world that was rapidly changing. The forests were disappearing, cleared for farmland and towns, and the hunt was a way to hold onto a piece of that wild, untamed past. And while we might chuckle at the absurdities of medieval hunting, there's something undeniably human about the whole affair. The desire to test oneself against nature, to face danger and find courage, is a tale as old as time. So while the noble hunter might not have been the dashing hero of legend, his story is one of ambition, folly, and the eternal quest to find meaning in the chaos of life. As we move forward, let's not forget that for every tale of glory, there were countless stories of mud, mishaps, and the humbling reality of nature's indifference. The hunt was a game where the stakes were high, and the outcome was as unpredictable as the English weather. The next time you hear tales of noble hunters and their grand exploits, remember that behind every legend lies a story of grit, grime, and the occasional muddy tumble. And in that, perhaps, lies the true romance of the medieval hunt. But enough about the misadventures of our mud-splattered nobles. Let's talk about the cultural footprint hunting left on medieval England, a footprint as deep as a noble's boot in a rain-soaked forest. This wasn't just a pastime for the privileged. Hunting played a starring role in the grand theatrical production of medieval society. It strutted across the stage of literature, art, and social hierarchy like a peacock in full display, feathers unfurled for all to admire. Hunting was more than action and adventure. It was a cultural touchstone. The tales of the hunt echoed through the great halls in songs and stories, each recounting daring exploits that may or may not have been polished with a liberal dose of creative license. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster movie, with noble hunters cast as the swashbuckling heroes. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, anyone. This 14th century chivalric romance might have spun its fair share of fantasy, but its hunting scenes were grounded in the very real practices of the day, with all the pageantry and peril you'd expect. Art, too, captured the hunt's grandeur. Tapestries and paintings immortalized hunting scenes, showing not just the chase, but the social dance that went with it. A tapestry wasn't just wall decor. It was a status symbol, a woven Instagram post proclaiming, "Look at me, I hunt, therefore I am somebody." The unicorn tapestries, for example, might have featured mythical creatures, but their depictions of hunting were all too real, complete with nobles, hounds, and the ever-elusive prey. Now, let's debunk the myth of hunting as a noble pursuit entirely free of class tension. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The forest was a microcosm of medieval society, where the hierarchy was as rigid as a knight's armor. The elite were the stars of the show, parading their wealth and power, while the common folk played supporting roles, or were left out entirely. This wasn't the democratic, everyone-gets-a-rifle kind of hunting we might picture today. It was more of a keep-out, unless you're wearing silk and own a small army affair. Forest laws, as we've touched on, were the velvet ropes of medieval life, keeping the riffraff at bay. The nobles' right to hunt was a badge of authority, a reminder that they ruled by divine right, or at least by the right of having a bigger sword and more land. Peasants had about as much chance of joining a hunt as they did of becoming king. This wasn't just about preserving game, it was about preserving the social order. Hunting was a privilege that reinforced class divisions, a reminder that some folks were born to ride through the woods, while others were born to clear them. But here's the thing. While the myths of noble hunters make for good stories, they also reveal a deeper truth about human nature. People have always been drawn to the idea of taming the wild, of proving their mettle against nature's challenges. It's a narrative as old as time, woven into the fabric of our history and our psyche. The appeal of the hunt, with its mix of danger, skill, and glory, speaks to something primal within us, something that transcends the centuries. Fast forward to today, and you'll see echoes of these medieval hunts in modern traditions. Sure, we might not have knights galloping through the local park, but hunting remains a pastime that carries its own cultural weight. In many places, it's still a rite of passage, a way to connect with the past and the natural world. And while the equipment might be more high-tech, goodbye, crossbows, hello, high-powered rifles, the essence of the hunt remains much the same. Yet the class divides of medieval hunting have left their mark. Modern hunting can still be a symbol of status, often requiring a hefty investment in gear, permits, and land. And while today's hunters might not face the threat of losing a hand for poaching, the legal landscape remains a complex web of rules and regulations. So, as we wrap up our journey through the forests of medieval England, let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy of the hunt. It was a world where nobility rode out to prove their courage, where the line between hunter and hunted blurred in a dance of power and privilege. But beneath the pomp and circumstance lay a society grappling with its own contradictions, where the glory of the hunt was tempered by the harsh realities of social order. The stories of noble hunters, with their mix of romance and reality, remind us that history is never as simple as it seems. Behind every legend lies a tapestry of human ambition, folly, and resilience. And as we look back on the hunts of the past, we find a mirror reflecting not just who we were, but who we are, and perhaps a glimpse of who we might yet become.